Oh, I feel bad calling on
Oh,
you
no.
because your voice is gone. So if people can't hear, just most of the time what's being said. So do you want me to call the roll? Or why don't we just go down the rail and say your name.
Niedergang.
Cohen.
Crummiller.
Mayor Lumpert.
Tim Quinn here.
Leticia Fraga here.
Dwayne Williamson present.
Okay. And now please join me for the Pledge of Allegiance.
Oh, right here. Your right, my left. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, we're being kept on our toes tonight.
My left.
All right, we have several sets of minutes. Are there any comments or corrections to the minutes, or would somebody like to move them in block?
I
I'll move
made
them
a
in block.
few suggestions previously to amend the minutes. Yeah,
Okay,
Should I-
have those been incorporated then?
I believe so.
Okay, great. All right, so they've been moved in block by Ms. Krummeller. Is there a second?
Second.
Seconded by Mr. Quinn. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, the minutes pass. And now we come to announcements, and I'll start on my right with Ms. Niedergang. Any announcements this evening?
Yes, I do have a couple of announcements. First, of a general nature, I want to say that as part of our steps towards user-friendly government, which is a council priority this year, that members of our boards, committees, and commissions will be receiving nameplates so that visitors, when they come to a commission, will see who everybody is and be able to associate names with faces. And then I have a couple of announcements from the health department. First, that the health department will be hosting a free rabies clinic on Saturday, March 30th. The clinic will be held at the Princeton Fire Department, 363 Witherspoon Street. This is free for any New Jersey resident, cats and dogs only, so keep your pet raccoons at home, please. All dogs must be on a leash, and all cats must be in a carrier. And also animal-related, Save Animal Shelter will be offering microchip services for a fee of $25. The Princeton Animal Control Officer carries a microchip reader, so if your dog or cat gets out and gets lost, this is a great way to be sure that they will be returned safely to home. So I urge all of you pet owners out there to take advantage of this. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Grun, any
No
announcements?
announcements.
I just want to clarify that they're name cards made out of cardstock. We're not buying like expensive.
Thank you.
things.
We're on the cheap.
No announcements, but I want to offer that I already made those name cards for the CRC, so no need for them to have them.
No announcements.
I just have one announcement tonight, which is something we recently heard from New Jersey Transit. They said that they will be announcing within the next 3 weeks a date certain for resumption of the Dinky service. So I want to thank, we had the commissioner and New Jersey Transit executive director at the station last Tuesday night, and we had a tremendous showing from commuters, and I think that made a difference. So I want to thank everybody who came out. And just to clarify, the service isn't going to be restarting within the next 3 weeks, but they're at least going to give us a date within the next 3 weeks. And they've committed to bringing it back sometime in the second quarter, which is April through June. Are there any staff reports or announcements? Nope. Okay. Then we'll move on to comments from the public for items that are not already on the agenda. And we'll start with people who signed up on the sign-up sheet. And first person is Howard Silbersher.
And I've lived in Princeton since 2005. I wrote a letter to the town topics, which was published last Wednesday about the intersection we all know between Harrison Street and Nassau Street. And I wrote that when I drive across that intersection, there are potholes, ruts, ditches. My car vibrates, shakes, and veers off to the side dangerously. With all the taxes we pay in Princeton and with all the amenities, why is there an intersection that is emblematic of a banana republic, a country that is struggling financially, culturally, and a country that is unsafe and unhealthy for the citizens who live there? I called the engineering department here, who referred me to somebody in Trenton at the Office of Community Relations, Kimberly something, and had a long talk with her. She's aware of it, I think, but she certainly was not going to have any action on it. But she also told me it's a state road. I said, I don't care who it is. We pay our taxes here. It's a very dangerous road. A few people in Princeton, 2 people approached me this weekend and said they would be willing to participate in a sit-in in that intersection with me, with one day, maybe on a Wednesday or Thursday when it's very busy. I'm sure 20, 30,000 cars go through that intersection every single day. We bring bridge chairs and just sit down there and back up the traffic for several miles on all 4 directions and make people aware that it's a problem. It's a very dangerous intersection. With the ruts, the potholes, the holes, can veer an inexperienced driver off to one side, cause an accident, or a senior citizen whose reflexes are not what they used to be can have the same issue. And I really don't understand why an intersection like that remains in the poor condition that it is, and it should be fixed and repaved completely. And I'd like to get some support from this body right here with the state. If you want me to call somebody, I'll be glad to do so and lead the charge on this, and that should be fixed no later than June 1st. Thank you.
Thank you. I think that the applause wasn't very loud, but we all feel your pain, and I'm happy to follow up with that personally myself. Tomorrow it is a state road, so the town does not have the authority to go out there and fix the potholes on a state road, but we can certainly advocate that it needs to get done. I know sometimes it can be difficult to get things fixed during the winter because whatever they put in there is not going to stay, but I think there are new materials now where they can, we can encourage them to try to do a temporary fix, because it is really dangerous to have, you hit a pothole and your car lurches and they're, so anyway, we hear you, and we'll.
She did say that she's going to try to get a Band-Aid on it with some just fix the potholes for now, and eventually, hopefully, repave the whole intersection.
Right. Yeah, and that's typically how we have to deal with those things. And we have a long wish list for the state, but I'll make sure they know that this is a pressing priority. So thank you for raising that. Next is Daniel Harris.
Good evening, Madam Mayor, members of Council. First, I want to thank you, Madam Mayor, for fighting back last Monday against unconstitutional and divisive acts by the American president against immigrants and their children. Princeton can and will resist. We can establish an Indigenous Peoples Day. IPD is the easiest acronym for one that you will have many times, I hope, this year, to replace Columbus Day that has been sanctified in the American imagination only since 1937. Such an act will move us further towards inclusivity, not division. It will begin amends for our Pequot Wars, 1637, 1638, our removals of indigenous peoples westward, their brainwashing in eastern schools, such as the infamous one in Carlisle, Pennsylvania, and then their near elimination. It will reject Columbus's own enslaving of free people as the easiest way to gain profit. I learned today, while I was doing a little bit research for my comments, that the Pequots who survived the wars waged against them by the Puritans were sold south into the West Indies as slaves. I had not known that. Patty Soul and I have worked on this project since last Columbus Day, we strive to end that warped holiday altogether. We were delighted to learn from Councilwoman Fraga last week that the establishment of an IPD enjoys great support among council members and the Civil Rights Commission. The IPD should be marked not simply by a council resolution. It is our opportunity to engage our whole community. Let's imagine it as a day of community service, as both the mayor and Councilwoman Fraga have also thought. This new day should be inspired by the indigenous inhabitants who preceded beyond memory the white people who settled here and created plantations on this continent. We have a great opportunity for activities and programs commemorating our IPD that reflect and expand indigenous values. Chief among these, we think, should be programs inspired by environmental wisdom and consciousness of our never greater need for sustainable practices. Princeton's wealth of environmental groups can devise programs for the community. The young gardeners at our schools can also display and invite. Any Indigenous Peoples Day demands that we face history and tell the real truths about white assaults against Indigenous peoples from Puritan days onwards. As with the ongoing effort to revise our teaching materials for African American history, we should establish a task force to revise school textbooks to reflect an honest look at the dark work we have done. Parents should be invited to attend teach-ins. Our Indigenous Peoples Day should also reflect our aims of communal inclusivity, both within municipal Princeton and in our surrounding communities, whom we hope to inspire by our work. New Jersey, as I think you know, is home to 34,000 Lenni Lenape Indigenous peoples, some of whom I have heard personally speak at continuing conversations. They must be included in our commemorations so that those of us who are other can learn what they have to teach us. Readings and lectures at Princeton Public Library, performances and visual displays at the Arts Council and the Princeton Historical Society can be programmed. You should know that people in the Princeton University American Indian and Indigenous Studies Working Group have already expressed interest in contributing to our efforts. This abbreviated list indicates how IPD activities can be replicated every year. In brief, the IPD can be far more than a name. It is an opportunity for yearly offerings to energize our entire community. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And I know that, did you want to respond?
I just wanted to clarify that, as Mr. Harris knows, the Civil Rights Commission has identified this as one of their goals and have already formed a subcommittee to work
Correct.
on this. So it is, the CRC is committed on working on this and hopefully having something to present to council before that date. However, because we have, the CRC has not yet met or proposed a resolution or report of activities, I can't speak for the rest of my council members because nothing has been presented yet.
Very good. Thank you, Ms. Fraga.
And I would just also add to that I think you know this already, but we don't have any control over the school curriculum here. So if you want to get the school board involved, I think the CRC could do some informal outreach to them, but maybe you want to go over there and talk about the fact that they might want to think about this for their programming for next year. But that would not be something that...
I do understand that, Madam Mayor. My remarks, with all that in mind, were meant to simply put it on everybody's radar.
Right.
Thank you.
Yeah.
May I add something? Actually, Daniel, that was a good segue into something that's been on my mind. Of course, this is 2019, which marks the 400th anniversary of the English bringing the first Africans here in 1619, right?
That is correct.
And if you add to that the fact that the first Africans were brought here back in 1501 by the Iberians, and no one thought to celebrate that 500th anniversary back in 2001, maybe, just as a thought, maybe going along with the same concept that you're talking about with Indigenous Peoples Day, maybe Princeton may want to look at maybe doing some celebration of the 400 years of survival of Africans, or people of Africans and people of African descent here, and their contribution to the Western Hemisphere, and to what eventually became the United States of America, since this is the 400th year celebration. 400th.
I think that is ideal. I think that's very good. And may I add simply a footnote that it is because the British who came to the southern colonies could not enslave the Indians, they slave trade that became the Middle Passage and all the desperations that followed.
Right. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anybody else who'd like to speak to anything that's not already on the agenda?
Oh. Hello? Ooh, that's a hot mic. Okay, so I sent you all an email.
We know who you are, but you should identify yourself.
Oh, yeah, Steve Hiltner, 139 North Harrison. Look for the compost bin in the front. So I sent you all an email a couple days ago about the possibility of, correct me if I'm wrong, but there's 800 or 1,000 compost carts that are sitting in people's yards or next to their garages. And and I'm also aware that I believe I heard that the food waste program will not resume anytime soon. So the thought was that all those bins that are not being used could be perhaps utilized for yard waste during the spring collection, which is of yard waste bags every week. I think it's 15 weeks a year, spring and fall. And those are the compost carts are the same size as the yard waste bags. So the crews supposedly could, you know, if homeowners wanted to use those in addition to the compost bags, it might be a nice way to segue into a better container for yard waste. And so I was thinking, well, the people who were using it for food waste might habitually put food waste in it, which you don't want now because you don't want food waste going to the ecological center. But actually, what you could do is put a nice sign on the yard waste cart, the compost carts, saying no food waste, and you could actually put on the cart a nice sign saying what you can put in there, because I know Bob Huff told me that you're having some contamination issues with the yard waste bags. People are putting soil in. So, and apparently Lawrenceville doesn't like that, so that's what he told me. And the thing is, with these yard waste bags, you can't put a sign on those, but you can put that on the compost carts. So you could actually use them for this purpose for the foreseeable future until you get back to the food waste collection. That's my brilliant idea. Any questions?
No, I think that's good. Thank you very much.
Okay.
I'll bring it to our next Public Works meeting as a
thank you.
concept.
Thank you.
And I will say that the food waste program, I was going to give a report on it when we get to reports, but we are working to bring it back. So I'm hoping that it'll be on the sooner side rather than the later side for that. Is there anybody else who'd like to speak to anything that's not already on the agenda? All right, seeing no one, I'll close public comment and move on to, oh, sorry, I did see you, Sarah.
I'll be very brief. Maria Juega, 66 Grover Avenue. First of all, thank you very much, Mrs. Mayor, for your appointing me to the Affordable Housing Board. And I would like to raise the question of the affordable housing settlement, and if you might be able to comment as to where we are with this, both wearing my hat at the Affordable Housing Board, as well as a member of the Princeton Progressive Action Group. We've been waiting with bated breath to hear on this issue. Are you able to give us an update?
Yeah, I'm going to turn it over to Mr. DeShield for an update.
Thank you, Mayor. The update I can provide you, as you know, this has been part of litigation. As part of that litigation, the judge has ordered us into mediation with Fair Share Housing. We're currently in that process of mediation. We're working through that. So at this point, there's not a lot we can talk about in terms of the plan. We do have a lot of information that is publicly available on the website. You can look into that, but the details will not be available until after we finish mediation. We're hoping that will come to a close very soon. Then we look forward to moving forward with our affordable housing plan.
Thank you.
Mr. DeShield, a question. I just think it's worth clarifying that as part of mediation, we are not contesting the number that the judge agreed upon. This mediation is not about lowering the number of units that we're going to build.
That is correct. The judge has already identified the number of units that we have to build. We're now just working out the details of the sites and where the sites would be throughout town.
Thank you.
Is there anybody else who'd like to speak as part of public comment? All right, seeing no one, I'll close public comment, and we'll move on to reports. And the first report this evening, I saw him come in. Where's James? Oh, there you are, sorry. So I'd like to invite up James Stewart, who's most people know as the director of the Princeton University Art Museum, but is here tonight as the chair of the Public Art Review Committee. And this is a relatively new committee. The liaison is Ms. Fraga, and one of the first items of business was putting together some guidelines. So I was going to turn it over to James to sort of explain what we have before us tonight.
Yes, thank you. So, as you've just said, the Public Art Selection Committee, I think that's technically our name, began meeting in the spring of last year, in part to consider a number of community-generated proposals for either gifts of public art to be made to the municipality or other public art opportunities, and realized very quickly that we needed a set of criteria, processes, guidelines to help shape that process, not least for the sake of fairness and inclusion. And after some months of painstaking effort, we've crafted a document that I think has been distributed to members of council that hopefully will be elucidating to you. This is, as I've suggested, intended substantially to allow us to actually begin making judgments about works of art that are either offered by gift or loan to the municipality, and to then undertake the first of what we hope will become a new wave of modestly scaled public art projects for our community. I'd be happy to answer questions about the document, which is, I think, pretty expansive, inclusive.
Does anybody have any questions? Ms. Carmella?
I don't have a question. I just want to say thank you so much. I think we all appreciate the work that went into writing the document, and especially look forward to what may happen now.
Yes, good. Great.
Thank you.
And I do want to also thank Mr. Stewart. He did an amazing job actually, I see Maria Evans here as well from the Arts Council, and together they drafted this document that you see before you, and that we are very excited to having this in place so that we can move forward when we do have some items that we need to review and make decisions on.
As I think you know, we've had a couple of departures from the committee, and so we have a kind of newly constituted committee, and I think we're ready to go forward and now have a couple of proposals that are making their way to us, and the guidelines will now really allow us to act, and we look forward to doing that. Thank you.
Terrific, thank you. And I guess I'd like to have a motion to accept the guidelines.
I will move that.
Okay.
Second.
All right. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay. Guidelines approved. Thanks, James.
Thank you.
All right, next, we have a report from the Civil Rights Commission and their report on the Municipal Equality Index. And I'd like to invite up Tommy Parker and Afshin Chomsky, members of the, well, Tommy's the chair of the Civil Rights Commission, and Afshin is a former member, and I want to thank her for starting this project and seeing it through to tonight.
Oh, thank you, Madam Mayor and Council.
And Melissa, too. Sorry, I want to introduce Melissa Urias, too, from our Human Services Director.
Melissa. And thank you for stealing my lines, because that's all I'm here to do, actually, is introduce these two for their hard work, and thank y'all for giving us this opportunity to weigh in on this process. I think the work that Melissa and Afshin did is great. I think it'll give you some great insight into the possibility of things that we can do here in this community to make sure it's completely welcoming and everybody is on board. So without further ado, Ms. Shamsi, Ms. Urias.
Good evening. So with assistance from the Civil Rights Commission and with the Human Resources Department, Princeton was awarded 8 additional points in the 2018 MEI scorecard. These 8 points came from the municipality as an employer section, which awarded 6 points for trans-inclusive health benefits, where we presented documentation that the municipality is covered under the state's health benefits program, which offers 2 health insurance plans that cover gender reassignment surgery. The additional 2 points were awarded for the inclusive workplace, where we assessed whether the town had a LGBTQ specific programming to attract LGBTQ applicants and promote diversity in the workplace. The municipality obtained credit with Human Resources sending job postings to the NJ LGBTQ Chamber of Commerce, who shares vacancies with the LGBTQ community.
Thank you, Melissa. So just very quickly to talk a little bit about the Municipal Equality Index. The Human Rights Campaign, which is a nonprofit organization, every year gives a scorecard to cities across the nation on how inclusive they are towards the LGBTQ community. And so in the previous year, Princeton scored 76 out of 100 points, which means that we're a pretty inclusive community. Mayor Lempert charged the Civil Rights Commission last year with working to be more inclusive and sharing documentation with the Human Rights Campaign to see if we could increase our score, thereby being even more inclusive than we've been in the past. And so Chairperson Tommy Parker asked me to lead this project, and so I worked with it in collaboration with Melissa from the Human Services Commission, who did a phenomenal job of documenting all the various ways in which we've worked over the last year to be so much more inclusive, which is what she just talked about. We shared the fact that we offer inclusive healthcare benefits, and also that we are an inclusive workplace because we do advertise broadly to including to the LGBT Chamber of Commerce. So thank you, Melissa, for all your work on that, and that resulted in an 8-point increase. So now Princeton scores 84 out of 100 points on the Municipal Equality Index, which makes us much more inclusive than we've been in the past. And thank you, Mayor Lempert and council members, for your commitment to being inclusive and a welcoming place for all. So with that in mind, and knowing that we're going to get scored again in 2019, the Civil Rights Commission had some recommendations about how to be an even more inclusive community, and so that's what I'm going to share with you right now. So one of the recommendations of the Human Rights Campaign is to convert all single-stall facilities in the municipality to all-gender restrooms to be inclusive of the transgender community. And so that is a recommendation of the Commission. There is an ordinance in this packet that was shared with you, and also a sign that's recommended for the all-gender restrooms, which is considered to be a good sign by Garden State Equality, which is the leading LGBTQ advocacy group in the state. Multi-stall facilities would not be affected by this recommendation. It would only be single-stall facilities, and it would not be cost prohibitive because the only thing that a business would be required to do is change the sign outside the stall. And the second recommendation is in the municipality as an employer section. In order to be a more inclusive workplace, we're recommending that the council approve diversity training, but not just LGBT diversity training, but also diversity training for issues affecting all historically marginalized communities for all municipal employees, and that recommendation is that diversity training be ongoing and on an annual basis. And it's the Civil Rights Commission's recommendation that they be allowed to vet which organizations are the most appropriate to conduct such training. The fourth recommendation is to appoint an LGBTQ liaison in the executive office, so either to the mayor or to the municipal manager's office, who would be responsible for looking at municipal policies and services through the LGBTQ lens, and speaking up when a policy or service might be exclusive. This position is also known to be a friendly ear to constituents who want to bring concerns to the municipal government, but may be fearful that they might be dismissed or misunderstood. It's the civil rights recommendation that this can either be a new employee hired for this specific purpose, or this can be additional responsibility designated to an already existing employee. Finally, the fourth recommendation is for council to adopt a ordinance prohibiting bullying in all youth-serving municipal services. So all municipal services such as parks and recreation or the library, presently there is no anti-bullying policy that governs their work with youth, and so it's our recommendation that the ordinance that we're recommending be passed so that all so that all youth-facing municipal services have an anti-bullying policy in place. It is the Commission's recommendation that these policies be developed in consultation with the Civil Rights Commission and that they be reviewed and updated if necessary every 3 years. Additionally, it's the Civil Rights recommendation that agencies be required to provide an annual report to the Civil Rights Commission on instances of bullying and how they were handled while maintaining the anonymity of the involved individuals. And actually, I'm sorry, I lied. There was one more recommendation. So the final recommendation is that that the municipality appoint an LGBTQ police liaison or task force. It's our recommendation that this appointment can either be a new employee or an existing employee with additional responsibility to serve as the liaison. This would be a person who would be accessible and a friendly ear to the city's LGBTQ community and elevate LGBTQ related concerns to the police chief and other municipal officials. Well, there's much more that we could do to be more inclusive, but if we did take all of these recommendations that we've recommended tonight, that were included in your packet, that would result in a 19-point increase in our score, making us a very inclusive, in fact, one of the most inclusive cities in the country, because we would actually score 103. So that would be out of 100. So we highly recommend that these recommendations be considered and adopted. And I just want to take a moment to acknowledge Aaron Potenza from Garden State Equality, who was phenomenal in terms of sharing resources for this project and also for providing guidance. And I want to, of course, thank Mayor Lempert for her leadership and also council members for your leadership in ensuring that our community is an inclusive and welcoming for all community. Thank you.
Thanks,
Do you have any
Afshin.
questions for me?
Other questions?
I
Yeah, go ahead.
do have a couple of questions. First, I want to start by saying thank you so much for your work on this. And one part of this, at least, aligns very strongly with council goals. One of the things that came up was a bathroom law, so you've already hit on that and have wording for that, so I really appreciate that. I have a couple of questions about that. The first is, do you expect any pushback from the community on any of these? And then regarding the bathroom signage in particular, I mean, obviously the cost is very low, but I love the signage that you included in the document, and I wonder if it might be possible to raise some funds to like hand those out to people to promote the best and, you know, the most inclusive type of signage rather than just changing it to restroom.
So that's actually a good question. I think with any new thing, there's always pushback, right? But I think in a community like Princeton, that would be minimal. And I think with some awareness raising about why these issues are so important and how they affect the people that they do, particularly in all gender restroom, and making restrooms accessible in public places to transgender people is such an essential and basic thing that we need to embrace this particular recommendation. Regarding the fundraising for signs, I think that's a great idea. It's something we hadn't considered, but to hand those out to businesses who would be required to convert, it would be a nominal amount that would need to be raised. I would be happy to volunteer my time to do that and reach out to my personal network, and I'm sure commissioners would be happy to do so too.
Great. Are there any other questions? Mr. Quinn?
Just a comment. Thank you, Afshin, and members of the commission who are here, and Melissa. I think that the goal of the commission and of a lot of people is that everyone should be comfortable being who they are in Princeton. And some of this seems like low-hanging fruit to me that we could up our score. And I just wondered, because I've forgotten, what's the average nationwide among towns?
That's a good question. Can I go back to you on that?
Sure. I seem to remember it was in the 60s or so when we discussed this. Mr. Parker might know.
I think, looking around, and we did discuss this about that, it might have been somewhere around 63, 64.
Okay.
And we had jumped ahead to 64.
So as usual, we're doing many good things, and we can do many more good things to reach the goal where everyone is comfortable being who they are in Princeton.
Good. Any other questions?
I was just going to, while you're here, just sort of discuss next steps with council. So for each of these, it seems like we should talk about a next step for it. So I know we have Economic Development Committee meeting on Wednesday, so I can bring the bathroom ordinance to that meeting, and we can sort of see if there's concerns and maybe, if there's like a sign concern about the cost of that, if we can work around that. I'm not sure. I think there's a lot of people who do it already. And I should say that the municipality already does it within our municipal buildings too, and it was a pretty easy switch for us. And for the inclusiveness training, can I ask, I guess, administration to sort of think about that? And I don't know if the CRC has more research that they've done about programs in other places that they can share. But it seems like something that, HR would do within the municipality, but I think I'll refer that over to administration. And I can also work with Mark about the liaison, either to myself or to Mark. And then for the police, we'll bring it up. We have a public safety meeting, and we'll put it on the agenda for public safety. I think I actually just stuck it on. So yes, all right. So we're going to be discussing that for a liaison to police. And then for the bullying, it seems like that touches a lot of agencies. So I would say REC. Maybe, Dwayne, you're the liaison to both those, REC and Corner House.
That's correct.
I would see. And maybe let's start there.
Absolutely.
Okay. And you can refer them to the language in the report. And then if there's more, I think it's a great project to work together with CRC on.
Okay, and I actually have a question also. To echo Councilwoman Niedergang's comments about possible, resistance, and going back to what Councilman Tim Quinn said, this does appear to be low-hanging fruit to get the gender-neutral bathrooms. What I wanted to ask is, do we have any best practices data in other municipalities that have instituted this, and what type of resistance that that came up, and how they were able to overcome it, and also like cost issues and things like that? Do you have anything that we can refer to so we can preempt any issues that may arise, so we can be more effective in instituting this policy?
So I can look into other municipalities that have done this and how they brought this change about with the least amount of resistance or addressing the resistance that they got. But one recommendation that I would have regarding the bathrooms is maybe putting together a press release or an op-ed and place in the newspapers the importance of why this is being done and why we need to be inclusive of the transgender community, because it's such a basic need, and it's really unfair if you're somewhere in Princeton and you don't have access to a bathroom because you identify as a transgender person. So I'd recommend like a PR campaign by council to ensure that this is well received. But I'll also get back to you on that question. So I'm happy to look into that. That's a good question.
Thanks, and thanks for your great work on this.
Thank you.
Yours and the commission. I know Tommy has a strong voice, but it's even better on the microphone.
No, there are a couple agencies that are pointed out in the report, and including the Jersey City Council initiative is in there. There's contact information, so they can answer. That's who we're going to reach out to. They'll answer some of those questions, but they can give you an idea of politically how it fits in. In terms of the gender designations of the bathroom, or neutralizing the gender designations of the bathroom, that is a contest that could absolutely be taken on how to raise funds, how to make it into a project. We just this past December, which also becomes a resource, we did a joint effort, a collaborative effort with the public library and the LGBTQ resource center at the university. So there are a lot of agencies in the area that are willing to kind of cooperatively move as a community to put this together, and that's one way we can probably look into the possibility of doing something to cover small businesses that have to change these bathroom signs.
Sure. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you all.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Can I just quickly thank Mr. Parker for his leadership of the commission, and also Mr. Quinn and Ms. Fraga, who served as liaisons to the commission. I want to thank Mr. Parker for the opportunity to work on this project, because it was a great learning experience for me. I grew up in predominantly Muslim countries, which are not very inclusive of the LGBTQ community, and it was really an honor and a privilege for me to work on this project. So thank you, Mr. Parker.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, next report tonight is an update on where we are with the Friends of Herrontown Woods. And
I've got one all prepared, unless you really want to do it.
I get a.
Okay. Just wanted to give a brief report on our progress in the negotiations with the Friends of Herrontown Woods regarding the lease agreement for the Veblen House and accessory structures. For those of you who are not aware, these structures were originally donated by the Veblens to Mercer County and have been a county park, Herrontown Woods, since around 1960. In recent years, due to neglect, the structures have become quite decrepit, and the county made plans to demolish them. A citizen group led by Steve Hiltner, who's here with us tonight, appealed to council in 2017 to help forestall the demolition, with the result that last year, Mercer County transferred ownership of Herrontown Woods to the municipality. Since then, we've made slow but steady progress towards developing a plan to support the Friends of Herrontown Woods in their quest to rehabilitate these buildings, while at the same time ensuring that the municipality will not be saddled with the financial burdens associated with the project. To that end, We provided a draft lease agreement to the Friends of Harrington Woods in early December and have been waiting for their response, which we received about a week and a half ago. The revised draft is currently undergoing attorney review, but Mr. DeShield and I are optimistic that we're close to an agreement which we can bring to council for ratification. Most of the differences between the original draft and the response from the Friends of Harrington Woods center around issues of timing, whether the length of the lease or the timetable for performing benchmarks to show that they're making adequate progress and are on track to reaching their goals. We think they're all resolvable.
Are there any questions for Mr. Cohen on where we are with this? All right. Thank you for the report. And thank you, Steve, for your work on this too. And next we come to the 2019 Council Goals and Priorities list, and I'm going to turn it over to Mr. DeShield.
Thank you, Mayor. First thing I'd like to do is just to talk a little bit about the goal-setting process for Mayor and Council. The first thing that Mayor and Council is working on, what they have indicated are areas of strategic focus, and there are 4 areas in which Council is looking at when they develop their goals. That's affordability, budget and budget savings, user-friendly government, sustainability, smart growth, wellness, and inclusion and social justice. It is through these frameworks that Council puts together its goals for each year. That being a case for 2019, as part of their retreat and their goal-setting process, they really focused in on affordability, budget savings, and user-friendly government in the categories in which they provided a number of goals and priorities. Next thing I want to do is just talk about what are the next steps. We had the retreat. And what we will be doing this evening is walking through and reviewing the goals that were identified during that retreat, making any adjustments, changes, modifications to the plan. In addition to that, what we'll also be doing, once we've made those modifications to the plan, we have prepared a template for all of those people who are responsible for individual projects, where they'll be completing those projects. And if you'll notice as we go through the plan, there are a number of things like the dates for the action plans which are not on here. That'll be a process in which those persons who are shepherding these projects will go back and identify and hone in on what are the appropriate dates for the action steps, modification of the action steps. Once those are prepared, that will come back to Council on the meeting of the 25th for Council approval. You'll receive a quarterly reports on the progress of those goals to Council on a quarterly basis. So what I'd like to do this evening is kind of walk through the goals. There are some where I will have questions for Council or identify some issues, and then any questions that Council has, any discussions you may have as I go through each page, please stop me and ask any questions that you may have so we can make modifications as we go along.
Mark, before you start, I wanted everybody to know that these are not in priority order. They're just in Mark's order. Right, that you did when you were putting it together. Okay, just.
So the first item that I want to talk about is, one, exploring shared service possibilities, including the schools. We've started that process, but there also is one which it should be an ongoing process, really identifying other institutions in which we'll seek shared services opportunities. That's just an ongoing process. The other thing that I want to identify.
Can I just ask a question about that one? Sorry. It's like, I don't understand what that is, shared services with the university, because normally shared services are government to government. I mean, we do have partnerships with the university, like the bike share and some of the transit we're talking about, but but that's not a shared service. I just worry about putting something on there that is not we're two totally separate entities. I don't think there's like a framework for doing a shared IT department with Princeton University. That it's, whereas like I think we couldn't talk about that with the district, with the school district. So
Right.
I just wonder if somebody was trying to get at something else here.
And again, I would ask, and I know as we talked about this, what we talked about is looking at other institution where you could create some partnerships. And I think it's probably maybe a better word to say partnerships than shared services.
That would make me more comfortable. I think it's more accurate.
The other issue I want to bring up, in a number of cases, we have some projects which are long-term projects, and what I did for these projects is identified a phase for year one. For example, if you go down to the end of the page, number 4, developing a dog park. What I am putting forth here is to creating a ad hoc committee that will investigate and do the feasibility of a dog park as phase 1 of this process. Do you have any questions on page 1? Not?
It's not a question, but I guess I just wanted to say at this point, as Councilmember Niedergang and I have volunteered to work on this initiative, and that when we do get started with it, we want to make sure that it's for the sake of fairness and inclusion. We want to put it out that anyone that's interested in working with us on this on this initiative to reach out to us.
We'll be sending out an official letter to the editor asking for people to volunteer, and there'll be a process probably on the website where people can fill out an application. So as Letitia said, we'd like to be as inclusive as possible, including non-dog owners, as I am.
The other thing I would encourage council, if there needs to be any changes, again, this is the working document in terms of those people that are responsible or any changes, please let me know as we walk through these. The next one we want to talk about is the neighborhood character. Actually, I'm going to page 2, item number 7. I want to bring to council's attention that this is phase 2 of the neighborhood character study. Oops, sorry. Thank you. Phase 2 of the neighborhood character study. One of the things that we have to recognize here is the same consultant who's doing the neighborhood character study is also working on the seminary. So there may be a timing issue in terms of when this will actually be able to be accomplished. So we'll have to work through that process of determining the timing with the consultant. Any questions on this page or corrections?
Just if Councilman Cohen could update us on the timeline for the seminary, such as he knows what the timeline is.
I mean, it has slipped a little bit from what the original intention was, which was to have basically a draft plan to present to the public in March and, hopefully get it approved. But, in April, I think that we're probably about a month behind in terms of the extra time it's taken to look at traffic issues and stuff like that.
So the second part of neighborhood character would probably be a second half of 2019 timeframe at this point?
I think so.
Correct? Right. Okay, great. Thank you.
Any other questions on page 2? The one thing I want to identify here is number 8, waste, refuge, food compost, and recycling. I actually combined a number of the issues that were identified at the retreat, including bidding out our solid waste, reviewing different alternatives for solid waste, the food waste program, and recycling into kind of one project area. So you'll know I did this in a couple areas. Any questions on page 2, 3?
On item number 10, which has been on our list forever.
Yes.
And so it just seems like that timeline seems great to me, but also given that it's taken us years, it seems like, is it just the end is going to go really fast, or it seems like it's more than a 2-month process. So I just am confused by this being done by June.
Again, part of this process, one of the reasons why we need to get this done, it is an accelerated process. And again, part of these things we'll also be doing is modifying any of these timelines if they are too aggressive. That's one reason why we set up the template for a work plan for those people who are actually going to be managing these projects to modify the dates.
Well, on that same subject, I think it might be 3 or 4 years ago we authorized legal a chunk of money for that. Have we spent that, or do we still have any of that?
I would assume we did, but I would have to look to find out what was done.
I got the impression that we were going to, farm some of it out.
Because we have done portions of the zoning code harmonization, because we did all the administrative section. The only thing that's left at this point is the zoning code harmonization, so I'm not sure how much was spent on the first 2 components. The next thing I want to highlight here is number 13, which is the fire department staffing. This is going to be a major impact in the municipal budget for 2019. We've received the first draft of the fire staffing report, which has indicated a need for hiring paid firefighters to supplement and create a combination volunteer and paid fire force. We're working through a process to develop a plan for how that would work out this year and what the cost would be. But that's something that I believe is really should be important that we need to have in the forefront moving forward this year. Any questions on page 4? Page 5 is basically parking, what's left in our parking, kind of the parking system program. And one thing that we don't see here, but there will be in April, a work session on parking that we will be providing. Any questions on that page?
I do have a question.
Sure.
There was sort of a part 3, which was to look at our land use regulations in regards to how much parking is required for different projects. Is that something that's next year, or?
Well, I think I think a part A of that is the parking bank idea. And so that was on a previous page. I mean, that doesn't change necessarily the requirement, but it gives people an alternative if it's a small parking requirement to essentially pay their way out of it, and then that money would go towards.
But there was
I
think Nelson Nygaard's recommendation was to look at the possibility of a parking credit system where the parking bank was only one piece of a broader look at, alternatives to providing on-site parking, even things like giving a developer negative credits if they provided too much parking. Mm-hmm. It was a pretty interesting notion that I want to make sure doesn't fall by the wayside entirely. So I don't know if you want to squeeze it in at the bottom of the page, or.
Well, I think maybe that would go. I think that goes more with the parking bank
with the
section,
parking bank?
And
maybe add to parking bank and other parking ordinances.
Land use.
Land use
parking requirements.
Okay.
Actually, I have something I want to mention on a previous section. We talked about, Mayor brought up how long it's taken us to harmonize codes of the former borough and former township. A subsection of that we need to consider also is harmonizing the the rules and regulations of the former for affordable housing for the former borough and former township. So just that almost as a very important subsection of the harmonization. And I know we have, we approved our third round consultant, who I presume should be very helpful with that. That'd be Ms. Shirley Bishop.
I will add that under, that's one of the sections I'm assuming that's left. We need to harmonize a lot of these before we go to a single code book, so I'll add it into that section.
Sure, thanks.
And my understanding is that as part of the round 3 satisfying the court requirements is that we're going to have to update all of our rules and regulations in town about affordable housing. So I would think it would almost have to happen as part of resolving the law, the final resolution of the lawsuit.
That's another reason why it's so important.
Page 6, we just started talking about it, which is the affordable housing plan, and I gave an update earlier where we are in terms of the plan. So that's another major issue that will, quite frankly, we thought this would be over by now. And it has taken a significant amount of time. We're hoping that it will soon come to, we'll get through the litigation process and begin the process of getting to our plan. Any questions on page 6? Actually, we spoke about the one that I was going to talk about again, which is the seminary redevelopment plan. And again, with the same consultant doing both of those. And as we just got an update, that plan is behind by about a month. Any other questions?
Under the climate action plan, I think it should be David Cohen instead of me.
Okay.
Since Jenny will have a hard time catching up since I've been doing it for the last year. She takes over.
No questions? We'll move to the next page. Here's a major character and a major theme was communications. And what I did in this case was just to identify all of the areas that were identified as communications. And we just need, and I need input from council in terms of how to tackle this. Is there a subcommittee that wants to look at these issues, or how do we want to tackle the whole communications concept?
I just have a suggestion that before we finalize this in the next 2 weeks, the council members decide amongst themselves which things they want to work on, if any, and we'll bring that next time.
I do, though, think for some of the communications that there are people in the community who might be able to help us. I'm not sure if it makes sense for all of these. One is, like, for example, reinstituting the robocalls about the leaf and brush pickup. I don't think we need a committee for that. Yeah. I mean, but for some of the other more complicated things, it might be something we want to think about, bringing in some outside expertise, volunteer.
Number 23 is also another major issue, is the transfer of the smart card program, transferring the smart card information to a phone app to provide to residents, and we should be having coming back to council soon with the proposal for that program. Next item I want to highlight in page 926, which is the Airbnb tax. What I'm proposing here is because there is a number of issues that should be explored, and that would be a ad hoc committee that would explore the feasibility of regulating Airbnbs and collecting a tax. Any questions on 9?
Mark, just regarding number 28, the stormwater ordinance, shouldn't Environmental Commission also be
Yes.
involved in that work? Thank you.
The next items that you'll see, we're just identifying all of the other issues that were identified, at least by one council member, as being most important or being low-hanging fruit. I don't know if there's any questions or any of these items, any of these items that council wants to discuss or talk about.
I do. One of the things I mentioned at the at our meeting was fire prevention, and I thought the other council members all agreed. We're talking about enormous sums of money to improve our fire department, but yet we have never, that I know of, embarked on a campaign to improve safety. I mean, to prevent fires in the municipality. I
But I think we do that on a regular basis. But it is listed. We do that in terms of our inspectors, and there is an initiative here for.
I think we could improve. I think technology has changed and things have changed since the old ways of doing things. And I think I'd like to know how many of our fires that we had in fatalities came from not having batteries in smoke detectors, because that could prevent people from, being harmed, and it could improve response times. And I feel like we should focus on fire prevention at the same time that we're focusing on worrying about our fire department.
I'm going to tag on to that and just mention, we have a really active citizen group in town that are interested in getting a fire watch ordinance passed for large-scale wood construction, which is also something I did a little work on last year. I think it's something that at least deserves to be on the list. I think it wouldn't be that much work for too many people. Just Trishka.
And I wanted to talk about, it's on the other issues. It may not have made it to the high priority list, but it's something that is very important to me that I have actually addressed as a very high priority, is the lack of an accessible laundry facility for individuals who I would say are most vulnerable in our community. This is something that for years I think many of us have observed, but it has not been maybe in our radar because it's not something that impacts us, is the many individuals who need to load their laundry on their backs and ride their bikes to the other side of town. Or I also see many mothers loading up their laundry on their strollers to walk to the other side of town. And I'm not implying that this should be a municipal service. I don't expect it to be that. But I would like to continue exploring viable solutions, whether working with our community partners or identifying what resources there might be out there to have a laundromat, accessible laundromat on this side of town. And it's just something that I'm very, it may not be easy to accomplish, but it's something that I'm very committed to have, to get done in my lifetime.
Sure. If I may add to that, I mean, as we develop affordable housing solutions to meet Judge Jacobs's mandate, and also just to meet what I think is a moral obligation, that's certainly something for us to consider as, and especially, as we solicit like public input for how the design of our new affordable housing units are going to look. But that's certainly something to consider and include.
Let's talk.
Sure. That's why I'm here.
Okay, I think we've talked a little bit offline about sort of next steps, but one thing I feel like that would be useful is to maybe reorganize this list a little bit so that it goes back to sort of telling a story of like what our overall goals are and how these different initiatives fit into that. So Jenny and I volunteered to work on doing that. But I think in the meantime, if people want to look through this and I would just I mean, if anybody has anything right now that they feel is like a major goal that's not captured here, it'd be helpful to discuss it now. If people think of it later, then we can try to incorporate it. And when we bring this document back in a slightly different format, we can talk again. But I think the idea behind this is to, I mean, a lot of these projects are really important, but to give sort of meaning and importance to what we're doing and to show how it fits into a larger effort of what we're trying to accomplish this year. And then to make sure that each of us as individuals have projects that we're working on, and that the boards and committees that we're liaison to, also that we're corresponding back to them, because we did have a lot of those meetings in the fall, so that people know how the work that they're doing fit into some of the larger projects that council's working on. Certainly with the communication, I feel like there's something for each of our boards and commissions there, to sort of think about what communication do they need to get out to the public, and how can we do a better job with that.
The other thing that I would ask is, under each of these, I have someone who is shepherding this program. They will receive the template to put together the work plan. So it's important that we review these, and if there's any changes need to be made, please let me know, because after this meeting, we will be sending out those templates to get additional information. So if there's some changes, just shoot me an email, let me know, please.
And I feel like that the sooner people can get back to Mark on that, the better. And I will probably be nagging people, even though I hate to do it, but we really have to approve this in March. Otherwise, it's already a third of the year is over. So,
I'll be off council.
And this is this is really our work plan for the rest of the year. So the sooner we can get it approved, I think the more organized all of us will be. Great. Thank you. Okay, then we'll move on to council reports, and I'll start on my right with Ms. Niedergang.
No reports.
Any reports, Mr. Cohen?
Already gave my report.
Okay, excellent. Ms. Fremler?
I just wanted to tell the other council members that the pedestrian committee, the name of which is too long to remember, met, and we are moving forward on improving sidewalk policies on lighting, crosswalks, and sidewalk cracks.
Just one quick report. I'll try to be quick. The mayor, council president Crummiller, and I, along with some municipal staff, met last week with our counterparts at Princeton Public Schools to talk about communication issues and working together for the first time in a long time. And we had a wide-ranging discussion that touched on affordable housing, on the demography issues, how we can support the district's new ad hoc committee on future enrollment. The shared services agreement that I've been talking about for a year is going forward. We're going to convene a joint meeting of the Board of Education and Council to review the proposals for the consultant to do the study. And other areas that we touched on were space planning, the implementation of the school referendum, the one that passed, engineering, our engineering department working with the schools on the drainage issues that plague the PHS PAC, traffic flow around the schools at dismissal and at arrival times. So I think it was a very productive meeting, and we have several task force coming out of that as well, especially around, and one of a significant thing, seems like a small thing, but significant for us, is that the schools will help us recruit crossing guards among their appropriate staff. We've had a long time shortage of crossing guards, and so I think it's a significant step in the right direction.
I had a couple reports. The first is probably by now everybody saw the announcement from last week that Brett Bonfield, who has become a beloved person in our community as library director over the past 3 years, announced that he is leaving Princeton to take a job in Cincinnati in April. So we wish him all the best in his new job, and we're going to miss him. Also, we had a meeting, a follow-up meeting to the food waste meeting that was here a couple weeks ago. So we had a follow-up meeting with representatives from the New Jersey Composting Council, and one of the things they told us was that by having such a broad array of materials that we allow to be composted as part of our program, that can actually limit the places that will accept it, and that we might want to consider limiting acceptable materials to broaden the number of facilities that are closer by that will accept it. So it's something we're considering. We're looking around to possible facilities to take our waste, and we're very interested in hearing from people, especially people who've been in the program, about how important that range of materials is. Because essentially, if we want to, what they told us was that if we want to continue to accept things like soiled paper in particular, we might be talking about trucking the waste much further out, and that creates an added expense to the program, and it also impacts its environmental sustainability because you're trucking the waste so much. So it's a trade-off, and the program has to work for everybody who's in it. So we do want to hear from you as we're trying to sort through those decisions. And then finally, there have been a couple neighborhood meetings with the Princeton Theological Seminary Redevelopment Initiative. We're absorbing all of the information that we've heard, and we're going to be doing an interactive charrette 3-day-long process that the community is invited to, and that's going to be on March 12th, 13th, and 14th. Mostly in the evenings those nights, and there'll be more information and details as we get closer to those dates.
Mayor Lempert, can I just ask a quick question about the composting program? If we opted for the more restricted waste in the short term, can we continue to explore options for getting rid of, for example, our pizza boxes and things like that in the long term? That is, if we make this decision now to go with something we know that we can do locally in a sustainable way, can we keep options open for developing another program in the future?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think the main question is who will take it. And, as we get further into this process, I think we're realizing that the only way to actually have certainty over it is if we build the thing ourselves, and then it's really a question of, how sophisticated a system would we want to build, and obviously it takes a long time to put together. It's like we want to have a program that people are going to use. So we need to hear from folks about, what's important to them as part of the program. Right. Sounds like we're done with reports, so we will move on to our ordinance public hearings
Mayor?
for this evening. Oh, yeah. Sorry. Staff reports. I didn't see you. Thanks, Mark.
2 issues I want to report on this evening. One, I just want to let council know that we have identified the 2020 CUME University date. That will be April 27, 2020. In addition, I wanted to give council a quick update on the budget. The CFAC has reviewed the initial 2019 budget last week. We are proposing to introduce the budget at the next meeting on March 11th. What are the drivers that are kind of driving the budget this year? We talked a little bit about it before, the fire department and staffing needs in the fire department. Increased costs in brush and leaf. We have seen a number of storms throughout the years. We're actually filling up the ecological center. As a result, we're now having to send some of those brush and leaves out to a outside contractor, which has increased our budget. We've seen an increased cost also in our recycling budget. Those are some of the drivers in our budget. We've made some investments in changing and efficiencies. One of the things that we've done this year which will increase staff, but I think create more efficiency as we switch from a contracted cleaning service to an in-house cleaning service. In one other area, its potential, depending on where we go, once we continue to review the budget, is looking to doing more cash capital, which is a long-term saving for us because we'll pay in cash instead of bonding for certain capital items. Bottom line, with the new expenditures that we have in the budget and our continued flat revenue, I do expect to see an increase in the levy this year, but we continue to work very hard to see what we can do to develop a budget that will have the least impact on taxpayers as possible. So we continue to work on it. We'll present it March 11th, get input from council, and continue to work on that budget as we move forward.
Thank you. Any questions for Mr. Shield at this point? Okay. All right. So we'll move on then to our ordinance public hearings for this evening. The first one is ordinance 2019-2, an ordinance by Princeton eliminating proportional increase in floor area ratio on undersized lots and amending the Code of the Borough of Princeton, New Jersey, 1974, and the Code of the Township of Princeton, New Jersey, 1968. And before we open up the public hearing on this ordinance, I just wanted to mention a couple things. So the first is that there was a slight error in the exact language when this ordinance was introduced. And so we're now looking at an amended version where instead of eliminating sections 10B-330 and section 17A-373B, we're only removing the sections of those, the parts of those sections that mention allowing a proportional increase in FAR. So it's a much more limited elimination of those lines. And I was going to see if there's any council questions, but before I wanted to invite up Derek Bridger, our zoning officer, just to give a little bit of background as to why this ordinance is coming before us now. And while he's getting set up, I will say that this has been on the zoning board sends an annual report to council every year with recommendations, and this has been a recommendation from the members of our zoning board as a problem they see with our current ordinances that they would like to see fixed, and it's been on there for at least, I think, the past 4 or 5 years, if not longer.
That's correct, yes. Thank you, Mayor. Yeah, this ordinance actually was introduced in 2015, the same ordinance, and it didn't pass at that time. It's an attempt to slow down and de-incentivize teardowns on substandard lots, and hopefully take away a little of that phenomenon that's taken over town. You are correct. The sentence that was removed but added back, and I'll just read it for the record, a nonconforming structure or a nonconforming structure on a nonconforming lot may be altered or enlarged, provided that such alteration or enlargement neither increases existing nonconformity nor creates a new violation. And in closing, we feel that this would give the zoning board a tool to deal with the number of substandard lots that we see during the year as variances, and there's no way to control the size of a house. Now, this formula sets the size of a house on a non-conforming lot, so we think it will help hopefully reduce some of the teardowns that are taking place. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Are there any comments before we open up the public hearing? Ms.
Just a quick question. Do we know how many houses that, let's say the ordinance was originally introduced in 2015, do we have a grasp of how many houses have been built since 2015, for example, that would not be allowed had it passed at that time? I mean, how many houses?
I would say it's run in the last several years between 10 and 20 variances for small lots. It's not to say that they wouldn't be approved. It's just the house would not be as large as it is now, given this ordinance. So it's quite a bit of our annual caseload revolves around these cases.
Yeah, I've been actually engaged in an interesting exchange on Planet Princeton regarding this proposal. I'm not going to go into depth on all the things that we've discussed. I think there are other members of council who want to address other specific things. But I wanted to talk just directly for a moment to the question of whether this change disincentivizes or hurts solutions for the missing middle, which is something that has been talked about a lot in town. The fact that, we need more housing that is affordable. That what we're seeing with these tear downs is an increase in the size of the houses and the price of the houses as well. And so I just wanted to address that real quickly and say that not all growth is smart growth. And while I agree that we want more density in the center of town where things are walkable to advance our sustainability agenda, the kind of density we want is a greater density of dwelling units, not a greater density of square footage built. And this ordinance that we're changing, there's no impact on the number of dwelling units that can be built. As a matter of fact, in our current ordinance, in other parts of this zoning ordinance, you're forbidden to do duplex units on an undersized lot. You're forbidden to do accessory dwelling units on an undersized lot. So regardless of whether we pass this or not, these are kinds of dwelling units that can't get built under our current zoning. And you heard earlier in the evening that one of our goals is to pursue part 2 of the neighborhood character study, which is really intended to directly address those needs. So I would urge people who are concerned about smart growth, the missing middle, to save your ammunition and not try to shoot down this ordinance, which really has no impact on the things that you're concerned about, and instead help us get past rule changes that will really incentivize those kinds of dwelling units.
Anybody else on council before you open up the public hearing?
Comment after we hear from the public.
Okay, so can I just get a show of hands of who's interested in speaking on this? Okay, great. So 2 people signed up first, so we're going to start with them. And then I would just ask everybody, if you'd like to make a comment, if you can line up when you start to see the line dwindle, because it just helps for us to hear folks in an efficient way. So we'll start with Jane Manners, and then second will be Richard Babicon. Sorry if I messed up your name. Yep, okay. So is Jane still here? Yep.
Hi, I'm Jane Manners. I live on Wheatsheaf Lane, and this is along with my 3 neighbors, all sitting on on the same row as me. This is the 4th meeting we've attended in this room in 2.5 months, and we've come to both planning board meetings and to this meeting and it's the one immediately preceding it because of our concerns about tear downs and construction of new McMansions. We went to the planning board meetings because there was at the time a proposal for a subdivision to tear down a house at the end of our block and put up 2 rather large houses in its place, and we unsuccessfully opposed that variance. And then found out about this ordinance, and we're very encouraged to hear that the council was tackling the issue of the missing middle and stopping the tear down phenomenon. But the more I have kind of gone into the weeds and the Planet Princeton article, the more I actually am worried. And if you can reassure me, that's great, but I'm worried that although the ends are hugely laudable, preserving the missing middle, preserving the character of neighborhoods, that this is going to have unintended consequences that might, in fact, make it harder for middle-income families to be in town. So I thought I'd give my own situation as an example, not solely, I think, because of navel-gazing, but also because I think that our block is the kind of neighborhood you want to preserve. We are intimately connected. We live on, most of us, I think there are 24 houses on our street. It's called Wheat Chief Lane. I think 22 of them are quarter-acre lots. But we happen to be in a part of town that's zoned for half-acre lots. So we're all non-conforming. And I believe that the FAR for our street is around 1,600 square feet. I could be wrong about that, but I don't think I am. So the average house size on our street is 1,900 square feet. And so what I think that means is that in my house, if we wanted to, we have one full bath, 3 kids. All of our kids share a bedroom right now. It's working surprisingly well, but it probably won't last. So my husband and I hope at some point to add another full bathroom and perhaps give the kids each their own room. And one of our thoughts was to turn the attic into a bedroom for us. But my understanding is that to do that under this ordinance, I would have to apply for a variance if I wanted to add dormer windows or add a little bit of square footage so we could fit that extra full bathroom in. And my understanding is also that those variances can be very expensive, like $20,000 is the number I heard thrown out, and time consuming, and that they're not guaranteed to pass. So at that point, my concern is that my husband and I would be thinking, okay, so we could spend $20,000 to try to get a variance. It might not pass. Or we could consider moving to a larger house, abandoning our beloved neighborhood, looking for a house that we can afford in Princeton. Perhaps that will be harder than we think. So we want to stay. We're the kind of family, I think that, we are part of the middle, and we want to stay in our community, and we want to be able to kind of grow in place. And I worry that this ordinance is going to make it hard for us to do that. So that's my concern. And I applaud you for all of your goals with this measure, but I want us to seriously think about any unintended consequences. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm trying to think if we should try to answer questions as they come up. I think this might be useful to and just sort of get a clear answer to. So you probably don't have all the details, but if you can sort of respond to like what would trigger having to come before the zoning board, and if you're already at your max, you'd have to come in anyway, I assume.
Correct. First of all, the fees, just to get an idea of the cost, you can spend as much money as you want. You can hire an attorney and an architect, but the application fee with the escrow is about $770. For a D variance, it's a D variance, so it would actually be a little more because there's a higher escrow. It's around $2,000. But other than that, it's a fairly user-friendly board. You don't necessarily need an attorney. You'll need some kind of drawings to get before the board to communicate what you want to do. And the board is fairly reasonable with, reasonable requests. So I would say her request to expand an attic is not an unreasonable scenario. So.
Sorry, is the situation that as things stand now, she would have to apply for a variance to do that, or only if this ordinance were adopted? I know you're not.
It's hard to tell.
Right.
I can't really, without seeing some specifics. But
so it depends on the size of the home currently relative to the size of the lot.
Yes, sir. Yeah.
And we'll also say, before we hear from the next speaker, that one of the challenges with zoning is that it's not even necessarily unintended consequences. It's just a really crude instrument, and it's the only instrument we have. So we can go one way or the other, and you're going to be someone's going to have to go in for a variance because it doesn't make sense. So it's, I think we sort of try our best. I think one of the things we're grappling with is what we have on the books right now is leading to a lot of problems in a lot of neighborhoods, and that we hear from them all the time. And so it's an attempt to fix that. We can fix it, and then you'll create problems on the other side. And maybe one of the choices we have to figure out is like, which problem are we more willing to deal with? Because I don't know if there's a perfect solution where you're going to solve one without creating the other.
Right. Just to add to that, I think what is a hassle for people who are creating a larger home is sometimes protection for their neighbors. I'm sure that everyone intends to have a building that fits harmoniously with the neighborhood, but a zoning hearing can sometimes help because we've heard from a lot of neighbors who had construction next to them. I mean, that's probably the majority of people that we hear from that they felt was damaging to the neighborhood. And so that's one reason I feel like a zoning variance, it can be a good thing for the community because it's the opportunity for a public discussion of the plan.
Okay, Richard, did you want to?
Thank you. So I share the same concerns. You know, when I look at this proposal, I view it, it's really, well, let's think about the borough. The borough has small lot sizes. They have older houses. Now we know, you know, the expectation of a home has changed over years. If you look in the borough, you've got houses 60, 70, 80, 90, 100 plus years old. Things were built differently. So in the case of your house, right, you had very small kitchens. Sometimes it's just a scullery, one full bathroom. So I think one of the unintended consequences of this is it seems to be that the people who are going to get impacted by this and will have to pay the price are the borough residents, because that's essentially who's been targeted by this. And if I think about my own house, right, we live in South Harrison Street, built in 1929, modest house, 3-bedroom, 1 full bath. The kitchen's just a working kitchen. And we're looking to say, you know what, it'd be nice to have an eat-in kitchen, right, where you can have informal dining and add in a second bathroom. But with these proposals, it's like, well, maybe that's not possible anymore. And now you're saying, oh, we'll just do a variance. The reality is it does cost thousands of dollars. Talk to an architect. They're going to tell you, don't go in there without a lawyer. Don't go in there without a planner. Reality is, if you want to be successful, you're going to have to spend a lot of money to go through that process. And there's nothing guaranteed. And it's a lengthy process. And there's waiting lists. And that's the reality. So options, well, we like living where we live. We walk to town. We love walkability. Maybe we sacrifice walkability. We move outside, and we just drive a lot more. Don't know if that's really an intended consequence of something like this, but it could be one of the other unintended consequences. I think we all agree, well, I'm not sure if we all agree, but I do agree that, you know, the tear down phenomena, building these monolithic structures is damaging to the community and the nature of the town, and we do want to somehow control, I'm not saying we have to stop it, but manage it in a more healthy way. And you said it, Mayor, right? This is really like taking a sledgehammer to crack a nut. It's a very crude instrument, right? It's setbacks and floor area ratios. How in the world can you control building and plan properly if that's all that we have at our disposal? If we can't consider the size, scale, nature of the development, does it fit in? You know, we've lived here in Princeton, well, since 2009. My wife previously lived in Princeton in the 90s. We also lived in Europe. And in Europe, if you want, well, we lived in Republic of Ireland. If you wanted to build, well, you had to submit your design. Did the design fit the nature of the neighborhood in terms of scale, style, right? They wanted to maintain uniformity and aesthetics. We're not considering uniformity and aesthetics in our process. And I think we need to think about a different way to address zoning and planning that I guess is more sophisticated and maybe needs to be updated. I mean, zoning was created eons ago. I mean, isn't there a more creative way to manage this? And that's what I think we need to look at. I know the problem we want to solve. I don't think this is the solution. And I think the people in the borough now have to pay the price for this tear-down phenomena, because we're the ones with the older houses and the small lots. And if someone wants to do a very, you know, thoughtful renovation to the house in keeping with the scale and size of the neighborhood, modest improvement, in keeping with the style of the house, it's now becoming probably not possible. And so what's the long-term impact of the borough and the borough residents with this type of ordinance? I don't think we fully thought it out.
Thank you.
I,
If you want to speak, I would just encourage you to come up to the mic.
Since we're responding on a case-by-case basis, I do want to just point out that there are quite a few neighborhoods in the former township that have undersized lots as well and are impacted by this. So like Wheat Chief Lane, like Ewing Street and Linden Lane. And I think it's sort of misleading to say that it's just affecting the borough.
Can I just ask a quick follow-up? It's my understanding that we're not allowed to ask for plans for, like, we can't demand plans before a house is torn down. If a house is not exceeding its the FAR or not asking for a variance, we don't get to. That doesn't go before any board. So what you're suggesting about, I'm sorry, I didn't catch your name, but what the previous speaker was suggesting about having a house, requirements that a house be in character with the neighborhood. New Jersey laws, I understand that, and thank you, Derek and David, for supporting that, says that we can't do that. So we only have these blunt tools. We don't have that tool, which would be a wonderful tool.
But we do have form-based code, which is what we've been instituting all this past year as part of the character neighborhood study. So hopefully that's going to help address some of the worst offenders.
Okay. Hello, my name is Joshua Zinder. I live at 142 Moore Street. I'm an architect in town. My office is at 20 Nassau Street. I was excited and optimistic when the neighborhood character study was first started. I have been saddened to see the path the town has taken with it, though. Ignoring the neighborhoods and accepting the existing split zoning, a memory of a bifurcated Princeton. This ordinance change should not be approved. I believe it is discriminatory against the smallest properties and most financially strapped neighborhoods. It sets up an atmosphere so homes in the Tree Streets, Witherspoon Jackson, and other neighborhoods will need variances for the simplest of projects. I urge you to reject this ordinance, take a step back, and look at the setting up of neighborhood-focused zoning. Instead of zoning areas that cross neighborhoods with properties of varying sizes that we currently have and are always chasing amendments for, like this one. Neighborhood-focused zoning will also reduce the number of teardowns around town because they'll be appropriately sized buildings for their lots and therefore meet people's needs much better. And the form-based zoning that's currently putting in place is a great step, but as the scale of the properties crosses multiple neighborhoods, it doesn't really work. And you need to sort of take a different look and look at the neighborhood structure of our community instead of accepting the old zoning, which was flawed to begin with. Thank you.
Good evening, Ms. Mayor and Council. Thank you for the opportunity to speak. In principle, I believe that I am in agreement with my neighbor from Wheat Chief. I just want to make a couple of comments as a fairly new resident to Princeton. Recently moved into Linden Lane. It was a tear down. It was a rebuild in a home on 194 Linden Lane that my wife previously owned when she was single. Those homes are about 700 square feet. I think the FAR is about 1,600 or 1,700. We were allowed to build up to like 2,300 square feet because of the proportional FAR. So that allowed us to move here from South Brunswick with our son, who's a special needs child. Some of the impacts of that, intended or not, is now you have a family that's invested in the community. Prior to that, my wife was forced to rent that space. Most of the houses on Linden Lane on the section where I live are rentals. These people aren't highly vested in the community. Additionally, those houses are not well maintained at all. So there's a certain degree of blight that takes place. People don't cut their lawns for weeks on end, things like that. So that's something now as people that live on the block we have to contend with. I mean, additionally, I saw the goals for 2019 put up. I didn't see anything in there, with all due respect, about cost cutting or looking to reduce costs. The taxes on Linden Lane went from roughly $6,000 a year to roughly $21,000 as a result of this tear down and rebuild. So there's a tax impact to the community, and some of the things that we're looking to do, which are good, that are going to cost more money, like maybe a paid fire department, et cetera. I mean, you're kind of walking away from those revenues. Last but not least, there's the unintended consequence of maybe what that property is worth if people sell it. Certainly, I think the property has a value of X. If you can build up to 1,600 square feet and maybe a value of Y with the proportional FAR, if you can build something a little bit bigger. I know it made the difference between us moving into town and having to move somewhere else. So I just wanted to kind of make those feelings known. I'm not sure that taking away the FAR is the proportional FAR is the right thing to do. Maybe a more neighborhood focused approach would be better. I understand it would be more complicated and maybe harder to implement. I don't necessarily agree with the argument that, you know, we only have a hammer or we only have an axe and we need a scalpel, so we're going to wield the axe. Maybe the best case is to put the axe away if it requires a scalpel. But those are just my thoughts. Happy to be here, happy to have the ability to express them, happy to be a part of the community. My understanding, again, relative to what the person said from Wheat Chief is, if you live in these houses now, you could build up to the proportional FAR without a variance. Our lot was non-conforming. I'm not sure why. So we had to go for a variance, and it cost several $1,000s. And the lot next door to ours, which is probably a little bit bigger, but to drive down the block doesn't seem much bigger, that's conforming. So they're allowed to take that 700 square foot home if they want and expand that to up to, let's say, 2,300 if their proportional FAR is similar, or certainly up to the 1,600 FAR without, I think, doing a variance, just filing permits, because they would be within their right to do so. So I do think there's an incremental cost to everybody if they want to add a bathroom or what have you, too, if you take away that and you cap it at a much lower amount. Thank you very much.
And also, before you leave the mic, can you just state your name for the record?
Oh, yes, Frank DeSanzo.
Okay,
thank you.
Hello, I'm Christina Corvin. I live on Lee Avenue, which is in Witherspoon-Jackson neighborhood. So before I read about this in Plan at Princeton, I already knew there was a problem with the building ordinances in Princeton. I, too, don't like the tear-downs. But also, I don't like to hear stories like my neighbor up the street was denied a permit to get central air because of the building, too much building, you know, proportional FAR, whatever it's called. So to me, that's already discriminatory to our neighborhood. That's a big problem. And I was hoping that, I knew there was discussion about a new ordinance coming up. I was hoping that it would avoid problems like that. If we are also looking to add a very small space. Our house is 1,200 square feet. I'm happy to live in a small place, but maybe one extra room. We already have to get a variance, but now I'm afraid that it will be even more difficult to get, especially after hearing the air conditioning story. And if we want to live in a bigger place, then we will have to leave Princeton. I mean, we definitely cannot afford any other neighborhood. And so what I don't understand is why we cannot, what is the limitation for looking at the neighborhoods? I mean, you've already declared that Witherspoon-Jackson is a neighborhood based on the historic preservation. And you know already that we can't tear down our house because of the historic preservation. So why can't neighborhoods like ours be exempted? I don't understand what the limitations are. So if you could talk a little bit more about that. And one last thing, when Mark was talking about the goals for the council, a number of the goals are actually really touching upon this issue. So if you should do some reflecting about that before you pass this ordinance tonight. And I hope that you look at your goals about affordability and equality and equity, all those things. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And you just raised a couple questions, so I want to answer them before we forget them. So, so Witherspoon Jackson, as a historic district, it makes it more difficult for homes to be torn down, but it doesn't necessarily prevent it altogether. Is that?
No, I don't think it prevents it. I don't think you can prevent a demolition altogether.
Right. Okay. And there's something else you raised.
Derek, if you could address the central air unit, that's an accessory structure, correct?
Yeah. We did, it didn't have, it wasn't, the issue wasn't FAR, it was setbacks. So that ordinance has been, that issue has been taken care of with the neighborhood character. The setback now for air conditioners is 3 feet. Before, in that zone, it was the building envelope, which I believe is 5 or 6 feet. So we reduced it as part of the neighborhood character ordinance.
So please tell your neighbor that to revisit installing because I thought it was handled as an accessory structure, not part of FAR, correct? Thank you.
Oh, and I know the other question you had raised was whether it could be done neighborhood by neighborhood, and whether Witherspoon Jackson, for example, could be exempted from this. And my understanding is that it could, like theoretically it could. That's not how the ordinance is written. But I think that is an option that council has. I don't know.
You could, I mean, you can do it zone by zone. Another way that you could do it would be based on lot size. So if you're under a certain size, you maybe have a higher FAR than, you know, like a 3-acre lot could have a lower FAR limit than a quarter-acre lot, for example. You could set a minimum square footage and then have FAR beyond just a certain, like, this is the minimum everybody can have. I mean, there's a number of ways to address this, none of which can be done tonight. So you do have some options. The neighborhood by neighborhood is harder unless you're able to give the neighborhoods very specific definitions the way you do with zones.
Right. Michael.
Hi, Michael Wachtel. I live on 294 Western Way. That's the, for those who know, that's the one-way part of Western Way. If I understand the new proposal correctly, it would mean that every single house on my street not only couldn't add, it's already oversized, according to the new statistics, which surprises me because I think if anyone walks down that street, no one would say, these are McMansions, these are way oversized, this is really ruining the neighborhood. But clearly something's wrong with this formula if all of the houses are already too large. Forget about adding, they're already too large. So I think someone has to revisit the specifics of the proposal. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Carolyn Rouse, and I feel like I've come in the middle of a long conversation, and I'm sorry that I'm presenting information. So I disagree slightly with my neighbor on Wheat Chief. My big concern is water permeable spaces and storm drain issues and flooding issues. And so, and I want people to stop using the word discriminatory. I don't think that's the proper use for people following rules. So I think we should, these are middle-class problems. So just putting them in perspective. So I just wanted to mention something that I thought about, which is, just like Michael Wachtel just said, a lot of these buildings are just, have been there for a long time. And so what I was thinking, is there a possibility for, you know, we have carbon offset. What about gas, water permeable surface offsets? Meaning if somebody wants to go beyond the variance, then they pay a fee to the city, and the city can use that money to buy up houses that are sort of dilapidated or in places like along Harry's Brook, and they can turn that, reclaim that land for permeable spaces, and then people pay annually into a fee. So you know, if we're going to all participate in this and not turn Princeton to Easter Island, you know, we all have to sacrifice something, and that for people who want to build larger spaces, they need to pay a fee to help pay for the storm drain issues and also pay to, again, reclaim land, and so that the environmental stressors aren't such as there. So that's just an idea I had. Thank you.
That's actually a great idea. And the state just said that towns could do that, so to create stormwater authorities. So I think it's something we're going to be talking about. It was on our goals list to talk about stormwater and trying to figure out how to deal with it, because that is another problem in other neighborhoods.
Hi, my name is Jim Peterson. I live at 209 Nassau Street with my wife, Galina. We've been down the variance route a couple of times when we formerly lived at 15 Van Deventer. And I have to say, it was a interesting process. I agree with folks who've said that it's expensive, because to go in, you want to go in with a good, solid plan. You need a lawyer. It's expensive. I'll say that if you go in that way, conservatively with a really good plan, and if you are proposing something that's in keeping, I think you have a pretty good probability of success. But it's expensive. Definitely is expensive. Comments that two speakers before me mentioned about the oddity that a particular whole neighborhood could be non-compliant when it was a neighborhood that came into existence in its currently built form through the will of the people who lived there historically, and apparently with agreement by the town, and that it suddenly is illegal. That's just bizarre if you think about it. It doesn't really make a lot of sense. So given that reality of the zoning, and the fact that people have always historically been free within some boundaries to have their houses evolve according to their needs, I think that the tendency of zoning to be about placing constraints necessarily, it's a crude numerical formula that's done. It's hard to do, and you're trying to accomplish things that, I guess what my point is, I'd like to see that there be more things like, I understand the Princeton Future meeting on Saturday, we learned that air conditioners now are going to be a little easier to put in place without a need for a variance, if that's the only thing you needed a variance. That's great. Let's do lots more of that. And let's put our really significant brain power into thinking about what might very well be allowable on a broad basis, okay? So for example, I know there's exemptions for attics. If you want to finish off an attic, there's an exemption from FAR if you do very particular things. Let's think really broadly and creatively about what we might allow, okay? So instead of just all about what constraints we might place, because, well, that's my 2 cents. Thank you.
Hi, I'm John Sullivan from Patton Avenue. I just was wondering if it's possible, it may already exist.
Can you get closer to the mic? Sorry.
Sure, sorry. I'm John Sullivan from Patton Avenue. I wanted to find out, is there a way for people in town to find out how their neighborhood is going to be specifically affected by this ordinance? I read about Western Way in Princeton, and I was wondering, if my own street was going to be in the same boat. I just think people would find it very helpful if they could go maybe to the website, put in their address or their neighborhood and see how their lot is going to be affected. I don't think most people in my neighborhood know this is happening, or we could wake up after it's passed and suddenly we're on a non-conforming lot when we may have been conforming, the week before.
Yeah, so this ordinance would not change that, whether you're conforming or not. So this ordinance doesn't change the underlying FAR of any zone. So whatever
it doesn't. I thought
it
the
doesn't.
Planet Princeton thing said that it was going to change the size.
Well, I can tell you it doesn't change the underlying zoning. So if you are in like a half-acre zone, you're still in a half-acre zone. And if your lot is a half-acre or larger, then you're conforming. And if it's less than a half-acre in a half-acre zone, then it's considered undersized.
So what was changing?
So what's changing is that under the existing law, if you're in, let's keep with that scenario, you're in a half-acre zone, there's an FAR associated with that zone. If your lot is larger, half-acre or larger, then you have to comply with that FAR for that zone. If your lot is smaller, you actually get a bonus, so you can have a larger FAR on the smaller lot. And the intention, when it was written, was that it was trying to create uniformity so that you wouldn't have a tiny house on a tiny lot next to a larger house
Right,
on a
okay.
larger lot, right? But what has ended up happening on the ground is that it's actually created an incentive that was, I think, unintended by the original writers of it, so that you have a smaller home on a smaller lot, and it goes for sale, and it suddenly becomes, the land becomes valuable, and so then it becomes a tear down. So we're losing a lot of our
No, I understand.
sort of like, less expensive
Right.
homes because they're getting torn down. I mean, the cost of that is that for the people who are living there who want to add the addition, it makes it more difficult potentially to do that. So that's the trade-off that I think we're grappling with.
When I read the only thing I know about it is what I read in Planet Princeton, and the implication there was that people on Western Way would find themselves with the houses they have right now, anything they wanted to do to their house, a dormer window, even a small porch, if you wanted to alter your garage, you would suddenly have to go in for a variance. The implication of the article, it may not be correct, was that you would not have had to do that before, and now you would have to do that. And I think it would be very helpful for the citizens. I live on Patton Avenue, in Jugtown, we have a lot of, small houses, small lots. It would be really helpful if we could go to the town website and find out, is it going to change for me? If I want to put a porch on, am I going to need a variance? Did I need to have one before? I mean, is there a way we could do, is there an easy way to do that?
No, unfortunately, we don't have that.
Define easy.
Yeah.
It's not easy.
I would say if you know how big your property is, then you can look online, and we have all the zoning maps online, and you can look it up by your street, and you can find what zone you're in, and then you can find the specifications for your zone. If you don't have that information about your house,
Right.
then you'd have to come in and look it up.
Would it be possible for somebody to do a general, like a report to the citizens on this? Because I think if I lived on Western Way, I would be upset, right? Having read that in Planet Princeton, I would not be happy about it. And I don't know what's going on my street. It would be nice if the town could tell people either you need to worry about this or you don't need to worry about this. You don't have to answer now. I just think that would be helpful.
Yeah, okay, thank you.
I mean, there's a formula for the proportional increase in FAR. And like the mayor said, if you know what your current size of your house is, then I guess conceivably we could have some sort of like Excel spreadsheet. We just plug that into the formula and it pops it out. I don't know if that's something Derek or someone may want to add to Princeton's website. Not that it's that interactive in that sense, but in theory it can happen.
Hello, my name is Sarah Torian, and I live at 56 Lee Avenue. And having done a little bit of research with regards to my house online to get a sense of what the opportunities and challenges are, it's really not easy for a layperson. So I would, applaud those changes. Another thing that I applaud is the goal that you are seeking to achieve by this proposed ordinance change. I'm very frustrated by the tear down of modest and somewhat affordable homes and replacement with totally unaffordable McMansions that squeeze out the missing middle in the town. But I urge you to do it in a more nuanced and thoughtful way that does not have unintended consequences on a lot of people like myself who are I live in a non-compliant home, 1,300 square feet on a 3,000 square foot lot in Witherspoon, Jackson, and family of 4. We're all showering in the mornings. We've got one full bath, and it is a challenge. And so we've explored the possibility of adding a second full bath on the existing footprint, so not an issue with any storm water. And right now, with the proportional FAR, we have that room to grow. But we met with the zoning folks at the town and the historic preservation folks at the town and the architect, and we were told that expect to pay $2,000 to seek the variances just for the side setbacks, and there's still no guarantee. I don't buy lottery tickets because I don't gamble. I'm not going to gamble $2,000 to see if I could possibly get a variance, and it could be lost, and then it's all just money down the drain. And so that was last summer that we met with these folks, and we're still just waiting until my son goes away to college, I guess, and then maybe our house will work for us. I would also just like to add that our neighborhood, our largely middle to lower income neighborhood, has faced some of the largest tax increases in recent years, making it less affordable for the folks who are there, less affordable for people who would like to move there. And this proposed ordinance change is going to negatively impact the folks in that neighborhood because we have smaller lots. Lee Avenue, I was told, is 98% all non-conforming, non-compliant right now. This is just going to make that even more of a challenge. And so I would just like to echo what other folks have said about we need to think of ways that are more nuanced, more tailored to the different neighborhoods in this town. There's no reason why we need to use one blunt approach when the neighborhoods in this town are so incredibly different. Seems like there's a possibility for that, and I would just urge you to explore that possibility rather than this.
Thank you.
So I live, Michelle Alpern at 56 Robert Road, and so we live in what used to be a kind of Princeton split level, dark, dreary, poorly designed. And we decided at first that we wanted to open up the main floor. But then we sort of went back and forth for a year because to open up the main floor and make that contemporary, modern, and light, it would have meant that the bedroom floors would be totally unmatching. So we also had a garage that when it was inspected, the wall was off. So we knocked down the garage, we made it a little bigger, and we moved a bedroom on top of it, which, so it became a contemporary house. So, I mean, I guess the choice would have been to stay a house that was a dreary, dark, and whatever house. I mean, at this point, it felt like it was the kind of house that would have been knocked down like 5 years ago if I were to sell it. Now, maybe not. But, we were really careful not to build a house that was a McMansion. It's mostly the same house, except it looks better. It doesn't look gargantuan. It fits into the neighborhood. We've had, many compliments on it. And so, I mean, I think, the housing stock in Princeton is old. So you're stuck in a lot of places with a house, which is, it doesn't work that well. So if you want to change it, I think it would be good if you were able to change it without having to go through all these obstacles.
Hi, I'm Charles Carney. I live on 702 Prospect Avenue. So I'd just like to address some of the comments. The implication seems to be that people think that if they live on a non-conforming lot, suddenly their house will be non-conforming itself. And that isn't the case. I live in an R4 zone. It's half-acre minimum lot area, 20% FAR. Almost all the properties near to me are 0.4 acres instead of 0.5, and they're all under 20% FAR. They're already conforming even under the new rules, and they could even do additions and still stay conforming. There's been a few properties put up recently which have made use of the proportional increase in the FAR, and they are far too big, and I would really like to see that not happen again. I was also here in 2015 with the same zone ordinance came up, and I was disappointed to see it fail there, and I think it's time to get it done. I think if there are still problems, they can be addressed in the future, and of course every homeowner has the right to seek a variance, whereas if my next door neighbor sells his house and something big gets put up, I have no recourse at all. Thank you.
Thank you.
Chip Kreider, Bank Street, resident since 1973. Some observations. I'm known to be direct, maybe a little harsh. The problem is, the unspoken problem is greed. The people who are making the big profits from the teardowns are not the ones who are paying the price. I recall a couple of years ago reading an article in the paper written by one of the professionals, justifying a teardown in a working class neighborhood in Princeton. Oh, the house was, energy inefficient, and it had bad bones and everything else, and therefore, the proper thing to do was to tear it down. They didn't mention the option of just leaving it as an affordably priced house for someone who that's all they could afford. And they didn't mention the $300,000 or $400,000 they'd make by tearing the house down, building out to the max, and then selling it for 2.5 to 3 times what they paid for it. That's the problem. You know, I'd like to be able to age in place. Now, I don't think any of us are against somebody adding a bedroom or a bathroom because maybe they had 3 kids when they only wanted to have 2, right? Nobody's against that. It's the teardowns, the greeds, the flipping. So let me suggest a different way to regulate. And right now, this ordinance, I view it as you know, an emergency brake. That's what it is. It's not fully thought out. It's got a lot of problems. It's an emergency brake. Try doing it this way. You're trying to keep the neighborhoods similar. And what you don't want to see is a bunch of small houses and then a McMansion and a bunch of small houses. And that's the whole idea of the form-based zoning. So instead of regulating it by lot size, supposing you said, okay, you're allowed to add to your house once every, let's say, 8 years, 10% of the floor area, what's there. That'd take care of the extra bathroom, the extra bedroom, right? You can't do it every year. You got to wait 8 years. Now, nobody's ever suggested this. I think it probably could be made legal. So the neighborhood's going to grow, but it's going to grow a little. You're preserving it, and you're putting the clamps on the teardowns. That's my 2 cents.
But maybe in like 24
Thank
years,
you.
you might have some.
Pardon me?
Maybe in about 24 years, you might have some unhappy Princetonians with that.
I can't hear you.
No, I'm just saying if they're doing that every 8 years, in about 24 or so years, you might have some unhappy Princetonians. Thank you for the comments, though.
Okay. Is there anybody who'd like to speak to this ordinance?
Hi, I'm Terry Adams. I'm at 74 Wheat Chief Lane. I have to admit I'm not that clear on the ordinance, but I wanted to speak up for 2 reasons. One, I did speak at another meeting about the floodwaters and I guess it's called stormwater issues, and I will keep that on my radar when you begin to talk about that because it's a huge issue, not just for us on Wheat Chief Lane, but for the town in general. But the second thing I think this ordinance may be alluding to, and maybe not, is I'm a middle-class citizen, and I live in Princeton, and I am elated that I can still live here. If I were to move into a bigger house, I would never be able to purchase here. I just can't. I'm a single mom, and I'm glad that I can still live in the house that I'm in. I love my neighborhood. I feel like I got blessed in the best street in Princeton, 20 years ago, and it still is, in my opinion. I would really like to see more people like me be able to move into Princeton because they can afford a house in around $600,000, which, by the way, my family thinks is insane that I would have the small house I have for $600,000, all of 1,200 square feet, versus a small family or a family who's starting to have have 2 incomes making over an enormous amount of money in order to live here. I think the beauty of Princeton when I moved here is, yes, you had affluent people who definitely made a different income than I did, and we had academics who were from international countries that really showed a lot of diversity. And my kids went to a school that was very varied, and they had kids who had homes that were, my house could fit in their garage, and they had kids who had homes like ours. The bottom line was they all played, they all had different experiences, and they grew up knowing other types of people. And I think if Princeton keeps going in the direction that it is going, we're going to become a real elitist town. We're going to become the town that most of the people who don't live here think we are, because they think we're crazy that we would, spend the money that we do on taxes and property. And I would really like not to have that happen, because the diversity of Princeton is what drew me here. And it's why I think my kids had a great upbringing, is because they had that diversity. And housing plays a big role in that. And I just want to make sure we're keeping that in mind, that there is a certain level of living and diversity and inclusion that we're alluding to earlier, that this sort of ordinance could really impact. Thank you.
Good evening. I'm Catherine Millen, and I live at 258 John Street. And like the former speaker, I will admit up front, I'm not completely knowledgeable about all the issues, but based on the conversation tonight, I think I would like to share just a couple of thoughts. I moved to Princeton 16 years ago, and when I was looking at the John Street neighborhood, I had many people in town ask me if I thought it would be a safe place to live. I was surprised at that. And I have to say it's been the best neighborhood I've lived in, and I've lived in several communities in the United States. But like many other people, I've seen a transformation in our neighborhood that is not always positive. The tear downs, people, my neighbors leaving because they can no longer afford to live there. I go into open houses in my neighborhood like everybody else does, and I have to say, I walk into them and I think, I wouldn't buy this house because it didn't have some of the upkeep it needed over the years, but also probably because the people who lived there before, they didn't have the resources to bring in architects to make beautiful homes. And so people who are going to look at them today are going to be coming forward to you and asking to make changes. I've aged in my own house, and as someone else said, I think about whether I will stay here as I think about looking at retirement planning. Given the fact that New Jersey is becoming one of the costliest states to live in, if I compound that by thinking that it's going to cost me a lot of money to change things to live in place, now we're going to talk not about bathrooms being added, but I'm sure some people are going to start thinking about maybe I should be adding on an elevator in the back so that I can go upstairs to my house when I want to be here in place. I really value the fact that Princeton is a community where we have arts and libraries and a vital intellectual community, but I don't know if it'll be possible to stay here if I can't change my house. I've looked around, and I, like many others here, I couldn't afford to live in any other neighborhood in town. But I say this because I've also been here sometimes when there have been other conversations that have adversely possibly impacted our neighborhood, and it's all around money. And I will put it out there, parking. There have been the discussions about what we should pay to be able to park, because as I've mentioned before in a public hearing, I am so sorry that the people who built our neighborhood in 1927 didn't have the foresight to give everybody a parking space or to build it big enough to be in code now. But I think we're all asking you to please give this some thought and to think about the neighborhoods specifically for their character and what they need, because it has been a really big change to see houses that are just not even in keeping with the ones we have be there and keep being built. And I have to say, I think of my own mother. The best investment she said she ever made in her house was to put on a small half bath off her kitchen. And I think of the many mothers and fathers who are here tonight for whom that would become financially unfeasible. And I don't want that to be the community I live in. I just don't. So thank you.
I'm another one from Wheatsheaf Lane. I'm Elizabeth Smith. I'm an old guard on Wheatsheaf Lane. We've been there for 37 years. And so my concern as obviously a retiree, my husband and I, we both retired, is of course the taxes going up because you have bigger house around us. The look of the neighborhood also is a concern. But again, and you heard it so many times, the water problem is really hitting us hard. We have so many floods in our basement. We have 2 sump pumps. But if you have a really bad storm, sometimes the sump pump can't even keep up with the amount of water that comes from Nassau Street with these big Mac mansions that have been built. In the last 5 years, we've seen an incredible change in the amount of water that we get in our basement. And we are afraid to go away for a few days because if all of a sudden the electricity doesn't work or sump pump won't work, and then we come home to a flooded basement. And it's never happened before. And so we had somebody that came over to give us an estimate to put one of these generator, $13,000 for, to take care of this problem. We can't afford that. With the increase of taxes, and then you're talking about putting a generator for $13,000. We, again, I've heard other people, we would like to stay in our house as long as possible. We've been there 37 years. Our kids grew up here, went to the Princeton school. And so it is a concern. And, yeah, I would like you to keep an eye on that.
Thank you.
May I just address the flooding issue real quick? So flooding is in our town is due to a couple of different reasons, one of which is development, but another is climate change. The amount of rain that we're getting has increased, and the intensity of the rain that we get over a given period has increased. I have the same problem. My backyard is almost never dry. And that was not the case a few years ago. And I'm not denying your reality. I'm just saying there's been really no development right around me. So we're all struggling with these changes, and development exacerbates them, but it's not necessarily 100% responsible. And I think Mayor Lempert referred to the fact that the state just passed a bill enabling stormwater ordinance, which one snippy commentator described as New Jersey is now going to tax the rain, which I thought was not exactly a fair representation of it. But I think it's something that, our state, if you look at the effect of climate change, the amount and intensity of rain is just off the scale. So that's something we're all grappling with. So in addition to the stormwater utilities, which will be coming up for discussion, I just want to say that there has been a change last year in new development, which is any new development is required to account for the stormwater they generate. And this year we'll be looking at an additional plan for redevelopment. So if you're doing more than, I think it's 400 square feet, you will have to, again, account for that water. Now, that's going to come with a price tag. We're going to learn what that is, and that will impact people's ability to make changes, but it will minimize the effect on the neighbors when all of a sudden somebody decides to add even a small addition and now you are flooded in a way that you weren't before. So these are all things we'll be wrestling with, not tonight, but going forward. So I welcome your continued, participation in this. Thank you.
Hi, this is Frank DeSanzo again, Linden Lane. Just to your point about the storm water and the runoff and the flooding, since I'm pretty new to this experience, Ms. Niedergang, she's absolutely right. So my house is about 2 years old, and when we expanded the size of the footprint that was originally on that lot, we had to account, working with Derek Bridger's office and the Board of Zoning, for the extra water that wouldn't get absorbed by that ground that now would be covered. And we had to put in like a cistern system at our cost so that we wouldn't put any more water into the storm drains. And then that water would collect and then leach out into the backyard gradually over time, like a septic tank type system would. So I think there have been some proactive steps taken by the zoning department to kind of mitigate that in new construction. I think to your point also, I mean, we have had an exceptional amount of rain lately that contributes to the flooding. It's a serious issue, no doubt. But I just wanted to say that the township has taken some proactive steps as far as these tear downs or additions to mitigate that problem, to their credit.
Yeah, thank you. I just want to make sure that everybody gets a chance to speak. Once, come up, Dozier.
Dozier Hammond, 87 Lee Avenue, and in the Witherspoon-Jackson neighborhood. I had heard, I thought a couple of days ago at the neighborhood meeting we had at Witherspoon-Jackson, that there's efforts to try to streamline the variance process to make it less expensive, especially if it's not a huge addition or a huge change. Is that ongoing right now, that they're trying to do that? And then I have one other point to follow.
That was going to be part of one of the ordinances we had, but we had a big turnout of people that said they wanted the hearing before the zoning board.
Mm-hmm.
And so we kept it that way.
Okay.
And so there's still, and I'm trying to remember if it was, yeah, it was
about
so that, right, so that you'll still have to come before the zoning board for those.
Oh, okay, but in other words, it's still anybody who wants to, if they exceed the FAR, they're going to have to go get a variance, and it's still going to cost at least the $700 to $1,000, and perhaps the lawyer, and then et cetera. Okay, because I thought there was some talk of making that a little bit easier, or perhaps reducing the fees in some cases, et cetera. Well, I guess in the Witherspoon-Jackson, number one, I think we do need ordinances, and this may be the one. I haven't really studied it that much to help stop the tear downs in the area or making huge additions to homes. But I think there might be a way to carve out a thing where if you're doing 300, 400 square foot addition, just a bathroom or a bedroom or something like that, which a lot of the houses in our neighborhood would love to have. I know that, and a lot of them can't afford it, so that's something that we're trying to deal with in some other ways. But I think that there might be a way to either put it into this ordinance or a different ordinance to make that possible, and it might be good throughout town if it's only a small addition, and as long as it isn't going to totally affect the FAR, I mean the footprint and the impact on the neighborhood. I think there ought to be a way to carve that out so people cannot add 2 or 3 rooms to their house in my neighborhood, et cetera, but might be able to do, like they say, a bathroom and or a bedroom, or perhaps both, or and I guess it's easier to do your attic. But there might be a way to put that in both for my neighborhood but also for other neighborhoods in town. So thank you.
Thank you. I think that gets at probably what we'd like to do. I think the problem is that people always sort of find a way to, we write the ordinance with one expectation, and then there's people who will try to take advantage of that. So I'm not sure. I think you have to treat everybody equally also. So, but I think we've heard from a lot of people that to add that small addition would be really helpful to the residents who are living there now. And if there is a way to try to structure that, I think we'd be interested in doing that. I'm just not sure. Maybe that's for our professionals to sort of give us some advice on whether there's a way to do that.
Well, but I just want to add that no matter what, you have to draw the line somewhere. I mean, and I think that's the problem. Like right now, let's just say I added a small addition, and then I added another reasonable small addition, and then someone else moves in. I mean, and the result is a bigger house. I mean, you have to, I think no matter where the line is, it's going to cause people to have to apply for a variance. And so I don't see an easy way. I think everyone, if it were up to me, I would love to say, if you're making a very tasteful, nice addition that fits with the neighborhood, I think that's great, but I don't see a way that we can put that into our zoning ordinance, because the same, a developer who's going to flip the house, there's really no difference in terms of square feet and, other setbacks and things like that. it doesn't really matter who's doing it. It's the same. And so kind of the innocent people might have to go through those exercises as well as the greedy developers. Or we just say we're not going to do anything.
Can I just get a show of hands of who hasn't spoken yet, who still wants to speak? Okay. Okay, here, come on up. We'll have, you can ask your question, and then, Yana, you can be the last person to speak on this.
I just wanted to go back to the stormwater thing. My neighbor mentioned she was running into problems putting a second floor onto an already existing first floor, which I think is 8 feet by 20 feet. And so I don't understand how that would be the reason for having trouble putting a second floor onto a first floor like that. It doesn't affect drainage, that's for sure.
There shouldn't be any problem with that. So it wouldn't increase impervious coverage, so you would be exempt from that. Glad to talk in the office if you want to look into it in more detail.
Okay, so Yana and then Marina, and then we'll take it back to council.
Yana Moore, 19 Green Street. I believe that the ordinance requires further study for reasons that suggest the goals are not well defined by clear community-wide or neighborhood-level vision. And one of my concerns is that blanket ordinances in general assume that all of the town's residential neighborhoods are the same, have the same goals, share the same problems, and want the same end results. The ordinance seems to draw from one shared concern, however, about the teardowns and the McMansions that follow them. They are a symptom of some issues we cannot legislate, clearly. However, we need to work, I think, from the other direction, defining in what circumstances size can be directed to produce certain outcomes. However, permitting a larger sized building area to accommodate greater density in the form of market rate duplexes on small lots is beneficial to a developer, but may not be in the best interest of the neighborhood. And in Witherspoon Jackson, it's all about affordability. You know, $1 million house that splits into two $500,000 units, or for absentee donors to rent, that would really be a conversion that would be devastating, have devastating effects on ever-increasing property taxes of existing neighborhood. And while duplexes are smaller, they are not inherently affordable, as one realtor wanted to claim several months ago while at a zoning meeting on a Lee Avenue property redevelopment. And even as of right growth has caused for rise in taxes of adjacent properties in the Witherspoon Jackson neighborhood. In fact, as a result of the reassessment in 2018, the taxes on new or substantially rehabbed larger scale Witherspoon Jackson properties held constant or received minimal increases. And that was because the assessor felt that those properties would not trade for the purchase prices previously paid. Apparently, everyone loves to live there because over the 10 years, really no one has sold. However, until last June, where one house under 2,000 square feet sold for just under $2 million on Green Street, making Witherspoon Jackson's per square foot price the highest in the town. So it's not all about size. As one zoning board member pointed out, however, the decision to disallow or change this square foot adjustment could also eliminate the possibility of someone using the extra FAR for accessory apartment. You know, a house in the neighborhood, whether it's $1 million or less, having an affordable accessory unit is a desirable option, particularly for the homeowner with a fixed income. Therefore, on the issue of zoning, Witherspoon Jackson Development Corporation is in the process of and has actually procured the services of a planning consultant to generate a resident-based participatory neighborhood vision and master plan. And we're in the process of mapping each of the 400 properties in the neighborhood. And based on a database, we had begun with 3 interns back in 2017. We're trying to move forward, and we're interested in working with the town and the new planner to really look at the fact that, one, historically, Witherspoon-Jackson has been a mixed-use neighborhood that had mid-century, 20th century overlay residential applied to it and rendered 95% of the properties non-compliant. But they were there for 100 years or more. We recognize that the type of uses, the ability to adapt within the constraints, but some adjustments, allow for the flexibility, livability, and sustainability of the neighborhood, and certainly any cost at administrative costs to move in that direction and to keep affordable existing residents is a burden. So I'm asking the town to become a partner with neighborhoods, as Mr. Zinder, the first one to speak, suggested, and on these types of efforts to consider, including these flexible improvements within the envelope, helping to facilitate small additions, affordable accessory units, energy efficiency improvements, all of these things that, in essence, and even this issue about the Airbnb policies, don't let's look at these things as revenue generating, monetizing policies. These issues in zoning should be considering the social and economic health of our community and its residents first. Thank you.
Yana, I just want to point out our new planner, Mr. Laplace. I mentioned to him your master plan idea for the Witherspoon-Jackson Development Corporation. I'm sure he probably forgot because he's being bombarded by intros, but I just wanted to point him out to you.
Thank you very much. Nice to meet you.
Good evening. My name is Marina Rubina. I live at 28 Quarry Street. I'm Yaina's neighbor. And in part, I wrote the article for Planet Princeton and started this discussion. I would like to start with Dwayne's point that I think it's very important, like you said, to have a spreadsheet or a website where people could go and look. What is their situation? Is their lot conforming, non-conforming? What is their FAR and what their FAR will be tomorrow morning if you vote for this? And it used to exist and it was taken down. There was a giant spreadsheet on the website and it was taken away. So now it's a nightmare and I know how to navigate it and get that information from the tax office, but other people don't. And I think it's extremely unfair to vote on this without those people being aware of the consequences to them and you guys being able to evaluate how many people are impacted, because I personally think you had no idea before I posted that what the impacts are going to be. Not to mention the change that was made on Friday due to local professionals pointing out the mistake of the section that would have had an incredibly detrimental effect. I think it's very important to consider that that was a major change and maybe this ordinance needs to be reintroduced and renoticed because potential for lawsuits because people's lots effectively have been downsided are huge. And then I would like to say that when you vote for this ordinance, you guys sitting here in front of us, who you've heard, we are pretty much consistent in our opinion. I would like to be clear that you guys are sending a message. First, you're saying Princeton Center is fully built out. We are the best we could be, nothing to improve. Second, Princeton makes things they would like to preserve non-conforming as a policy. Thirdly, doing business in Princeton is unpredictable and crazy expensive. Opening a new business takes a variance and your application will be stuck in line behind 20 bathroom additions on Western Way, Lee Avenue, and Wheatsheaf. The cost of this poorly planned move will impact the people who could least afford it. There are much better ways to achieve the same goals. I find it really upsetting when you guys said this is the only way to deal with the problem. We have a new planner that was hired, and we have consultants who already proposed alternative solutions during neighborhood character study that would already work better. We have it. Jim Constantine proposed it. And to say this is the only way to do it, I mean, we have a site plan review board that hasn't met in months. If you guys charge site plan review board, which is local professionals who work in town and know the code in and out, plus our new planner, I am sure in 2 months we could do better. So I will leave you, when you vote for this, just keep that in mind. This is what you're voting for.
All right, I want to do one last call before we close public comment. Is there anybody else who'd like to speak before we close public comment? Okay, we will bring it back to council. Does, yes, Mr. Quinn.
Thank you, Mayor. I'd like to talk about a phrase I've heard a lot in relation to this ordinance, and that phrase is unintended consequences. The proportional FAR narratives being advanced by some online commentators, particularly by builders and architects and their representatives, appear not to show an understanding of or an appreciation for the unintended consequences proportional FAR has had in some of our neighborhoods. I agree with those who say that teardowns are not necessarily the enemy and that not every house is worth saving. But my experience over the past 4 years studying the teardown phenomenon and seeing how we can mitigate it leads me to conclude that when houses are torn down in neighborhoods that predate zoning, builders who use tools like proportional FAR often produce houses that are either out of scale or out of character for the neighborhood. These houses typically sell for significantly more than their predecessors, sometimes for twice as much. When this happens, it increases the tax burden on those least equipped to sustain an increase, lower middle class and middle class homeowners. In his online commentary over the weekend, Councilman Cohen wrote, quote, any change in the rules that govern a community will create winners and losers, unquote. In the case of homes where new construction took advantage of proportional FAR, the losers were lower middle class homeowners, including people living on fixed incomes and multi-generational households who want to hold on to their small piece of a town that they helped build. So how does this impact them? Let's look at the tax impacts. In my neighborhood, Jugtown, the Oakland tract of Jugtown, which dates to the early 1900s, the most recent compliance plan, the way that Princeton does rolling assessments based on sales every year, is called the compliance plan, resulted in a second consecutive tax increase for a 2-year total of 15.8%. 9.9% this year and 5.9% last year. When my neighbors approached the tax assessor's office regarding appeals, it was explained that the number of sales in the neighborhood triggered the compliance plan. The neighbors knew that several of the houses that sold were newer, larger, and more expensive houses that replaced what had been long-time middle-class housing. Then they were given some good news. Their property values had increased. This is of little comfort to people who actually want to stay in a town where they've lived for all or most of their lives. For me, it recalls the lyric of the great labor anthem, The Preacher and the Slave by Joe Hill. You'll get pie in the sky when you die. To be clear, this is happening not only in Jugtown. Let's look at some other neighborhoods and the percentage their taxes have increased over the last 8 years. John Street and Lytle to Green, up 22%, 12.6% last year. Loomis and Hickory Court, up 26%, 17% in 2017. Linden and Maple, up 14.6%, 6.9% this year. Hamilton, east of Harrison Street, up 21%, 9.7% this year. Birch Avenue, up 18.29%, 14.3% last year. Turner Court, up 11.69%. Wheatsheaf Lane, up 9.6%. What do these neighborhoods have in common? They can all roughly be described as middle-class neighborhoods that have experienced the teardown and big rebuild phenomenon. Now, this is not exclusive to our traditional middle-class neighborhoods. Cleveland, Lafayette, and Westcott went up 16.17%, roughly the same as Jugtown. Of course, a street like Pelham will never be mistaken for Cleveland Lane. Meanwhile, here are some of the relative winners in this. Barsky Court, down 6.25%. Brooks Bend, down 10%. Cradle Rock, down 5%. Constitution Hill, down 4.5%. Lambert Road, down 10%. Mayberry Hill, down 6%. So I see the end of proportional FAR as a tool that we have to preserve neighborhoods and allow what's left of the middle class to stay here while we work on the missing middle piece of our neighborhood character initiative. I've never been one who thinks that Princeton should be encased in amber and should never change. I know we're growing, and I trust we will continue to grow in a smart way, but also one that doesn't force people out who have lived here a while. In his online remarks about this proportional FAR ordinance, Councilman Cohen wrote, quote, "The large majority of residents who like the size home they live in and like the neighborhood they live in will benefit from this ordinance. I couldn't agree more, and I intend to vote yes."
Anybody else want to speak? Mr. Cohen, and then Ms. Fraga? Sure.
Yeah, I just want to respond to one or two of Marina's comments, in particular the one about declaring Princeton built out as a result of passing this ordinance. I think it's really a disingenuous argument. Princeton Future, for anybody who follows what they do, has identified over 20 sites in town that are ripe for redevelopment with large numbers of affordable, small a, affordable residential dwelling units. We're not saying that Princeton is built out. We're just saying that we don't see the benefit of allowing larger square footages on these single-family lots. And I'll reiterate the fact that I said at the outset, because I heard somebody contradict it during the questions. Current zoning forbids duplex dwelling units, accessory dwelling units in the former borough on any lot that is undersized. So there's no way that we're discouraging those kinds of missing middle, smart growth development by passing this ordinance. We need to fix that. We need to encourage the ability to do more multifamily, more duplexes, more accessory dwelling units. We're working on that. We will do it. We may even put back FAR bonuses for doing those kinds of units that will replace, or more than replace, what we're taking away with this ordinance. But we are not harming the future of Princeton in terms of the ability to do smart growth by passing this ordinance.
Ms. Fraga?
Okay, so what I have to say is, first, admit that this is not my area of expertise. And so in these instances, I tend to rely on experts, on our consultants and experts on council. But having heard all the concerns here today, I'm not convinced that we have explored all the options. And I would like to be able to address the concerns that were voiced today. So personally, I'm not prepared to move forward on this, but it's not just up to me, I understand.
Ms. Carmella?
Well, I have been surprised by the opposition to this because I thought we would have a lot more support for it. So, but I do think that we should introduce this, and I want to have another hearing and before I make up my mind.
It's been introduced. This is the hearing.
Oh, it has already been introduced? Oh gosh, how embarrassing. Okay, well, okay, well, let me think about this while other people talk.
I would also like to say that some of the concerns that were raised both here and in conversations I've had with other people who are not here today, I also, as a non-expert, have relied heavily on other members of council and on the staff. But I do think that some of the concerns that have been raised, as I said, both in conversations that I've had today and here, do give me some concerns, and I would like to see some exploration. Marina's analysis of 3 streets in Princeton revealed that this would really have no impact on those 3, would not have prevented any development that took place on those 3 streets. I don't know how long that took to do and if that's feasible to do on a larger scale, but I feel that I would like more information on that, and I feel that residents in the town deserve a chance to get more information and see how they personally would be affected. So at this point, I would not be able to support the ordinance.
Okay, now I have my thoughts together because I was putting off what the decision, but I have heard a lot of opposition, but I also, at the same time, I heard some, speaking of, a lot of people in this room spoke about the problems with larger development and complaints about the larger development, and a lot of people spoke about stormwater issues. So I think that that we should go ahead with this ordinance, and I'm hoping that our neighborhood character initiative can address some of the concerns and also some of the suggestions. We are going to be looking at at a new phase of zoning changes, and we have improved our zoning from what it was just 2 years ago with a lot of form-based elements. And I overall am in favor of limiting the larger homes because that's what we've been hearing 364 days a year. This is really the first time I've heard a lot of people come out to speak about in favor of not limiting the size of homes. So I'm going to vote for it.
And I just want to add one more thing, which is relevant to that. We've heard a lot of opposition tonight, but we've heard opposition based on anecdotal experiences of people having difficulty just in general with development in town, with trying to do a project in town. It seemed to me that at least 50% of the problems had absolutely nothing to do with this particular ordinance. It just had to do with the fact that there was a side yard, or there was stormwater, or there was some other thing that was preventing the development. And I think it's wrong to deny the protections of this ordinance to the residents who like their neighborhoods and like their homes on the basis of that kind of, what's the term when you, like drift net fishing, you know, catching all kinds of fish in your net, most of which you don't want to catch. We're trying to make a decision based on stories that don't have any relevance to proportional FAR.
I'll start by saying I think Councilman Quinn and Councilman Cohen makes some good points about the problems that tear downs have been causing. The issue for me is that by trying to prevent one problem for undersized lots in generally in zones where people are allowed to build, which basically larger zones, you're starting. I really do believe you do create that unintended consequence in let's say the R4 zones where a lot of folks live in the borough, whether it's the Witherspoon Jackson neighborhood, the Tree Streets, et cetera, where our very zoning, which was done decades ago, basically made many of these living spaces non-conforming. So by trying to target just by trying to help those folks who are like, I want to do what I can to stop tear downs also. The problem is, by doing that, I think we create the other problem in these smaller lots, particularly in the borough R4 zones, where we're basically taking away that little piece of chance where someone may not have to go and get a, well, it's already non-conforming, but to me, it appears that we're taking away a chance, that small piece of chance where people may, if they can get their, well, the bottom line is this right here. I think we're taking away that chance where people may have to basically avoid going to the zoning board to get a variance to increase their lot sizes, right? However, I'm weighing that against the fact that the real problem to me here is that we really need to revisit all where we created zones that made whole neighborhoods non-conforming to begin with. I mean, to me, that's really the real problem. I'll leave it at that. I think that's what we probably need to address first before we even address this question.
Well,
Mayor, I would counter that the people who are facing difficulty adding on to their houses are not going to be able to do so because their taxes will be so high that they won't be able to afford to add on to houses. So again, I'll read these. Jugtown up 15.8%. John and Lytle to Green up 22%. Loomis and Hickory Court up 26%. Linden and Maple up 14.6%. Hamilton east of Harrison up 21%. Birch Avenue up 18.29%. Those are directly attributable, I believe, to houses that were built using proportional FAR to make the houses bigger than they should be in this neighborhood. This has created an affordability crisis for our town. And so if you vote no for this, we're just kicking the can a little farther down the road, and more middle-class people are going to be moving out of town.
I just want to ask a question of Mr. Bridger and then turn over to Ms. Kremler. So I know this has been on the zoning board's priority list for council as a change that they're recommending. So that makes me feel like they're hearing cases from these homes even though they're eligible for the proportional FAR. So why are those? Why are they coming before the zoning board?
Because they have a small lot, and you know, when we did the neighborhood character, at one point we suggested people with small lots didn't need to have to come back to the zoning board if you didn't meet the lot area, lot width, or lot depth. But then that didn't prevail, and then they kept that in there. So if you have a small lot, you get a proportional FAR. So that's why we're here. You know.
Well, so that's a slightly different thing. I think the complaints that we've been getting from the zoning board is the need for a variance if your project completely conforms to zoning, but your lot is undersized. That's been the requirement, correct?
Okay, and then the neighbors are objecting in those cases where it's coming before the zoning board because the homes are so larger than the neighbors are expecting because of the proportional FAR.
Yes.
Right?
Correct.
Okay, Ms. Kremler?
Well, I was going to say, I mean, I think even if we do rezone, we're going to have a choice. Do we keep the zoning as to conform with the houses that are there? to preserve the character, and if we do, we're setting ourselves up for the same, then we are preventing, the zoning prevents you from building additions and making your house larger and out of scale. So I don't know that, I mean, I think we should do the zoning should be, improved throughout the municipality. So, I mean, and make it all, a lot more fitting with what's there. But I don't know that that's going to change. I mean, I think no matter what we do with zoning, we're going to have to confront the problem. And we're going to have to answer the question, are we allowing larger homes or not? Do we want to preserve the scale of the neighborhood or not? Even if we change the zoning for that neighborhood, that we're going to have the same exact hearing, because we're going to say, okay, all these houses are all of a modest size. We think the modest size houses are right. And then we're going to have people who are going to say, I want a bigger house. So don't you think? I mean, I just want to know what you think about that.
What I think is, this has to go back a few decades, but and the council, like way before us, is what was the intent when they created zones that just made most of the houses in a certain area non-conforming?
To get rid of them.
And
that's a mystery to me too. Do you know that, Derek?
But we're the incumbents, so the question for us is how do we correct that problem? To me that seems to be. I hear Councilman Quinn's and Councilman Cohen's concerns, and I think Councilman Quinn did a good job of laying that out. To me, at the same time, it seems, it just seems more important to me to, I just like things clean. I'll put it that way, simply clean. I'm just looking at, well, I'm not going to say it from the attorney perspective, because it can get real crazy there too. But the point is, personally, I just think our focus should be more on cleaning up the zoning first. And it just seems to me that we're taking away, this keeps going. What's giving me pause is that I keep getting back to where folks who have smaller lots mainly in the borough and R4 zones, where they possibly had a chance because of the proportional increase in FAR to avoid getting a variance to make small additions, is that we're taking that away to address the issue of the larger issue of preventing tear downs. And I'm just, for me, I'm struggling with it intellectually, because I'm trying to figure out if it's worth taking that away in order to prevent. Is that the best tool to get to the other goal of preventing tear downs?
Well, I also feel that small lot neighbors are the ones that are more affected by out-of-scale homes. So it is true that small lots are affected, but small lot neighbors are also affected, as the prices are showing. And so I see at the zoning board hearing also, I mean, it's a protection for neighbors. Then the neighbors can go and speak with their their neighbors about their potential new neighbors, or whomever it is who's proposing the enlargement of their home. The zoning, it's true, it's an expense, but it's also an opportunity for protections. And I also want to say, I think it is an expense, but building an addition is a huge expense too. So I'm curious about the percentage cost of the zoning variance versus the percentage of how much it costs to build an addition. I know I've built additions on my house, and it was really.
I'd like to ask Mr. Bridger a question. So the kind of zoning changes that are being discussed as we have to do this before we do anything. What's the timetable for that, and what's the cost to the municipality for a neighborhood by neighborhood to undo the mistakes that were made 50 or 60 years ago?
Well, I was talking to Michael LaPlace, our new planner, about this today, and Trishka. There's a lot of options that we plan to look at. I mean, we have actively started consolidating the ordinances. I want it more than anyone else because it's virtually impossible to do this job with 2 books and then new ordinances that have come out that haven't been codified yet. So, I mean, that's very important, but there are some ideas we have about the mismatch of the zones versus the lot areas, you know, on the zoning map. And I don't want to bring them into the conversation now, but there will be public hearings, and we will bring those items out and let everyone digest it. And there's some opportunities to address some of this. The idea of consolidating the ordinances was not to create a brave new world. It was kind of like, here's your package. It's going to stay the same as it is, because that was kind of what was sold in consolidation. We didn't want to turn people's worlds upside down. But there are things that we could do that would affect some of these mismatched lot areas in zones that are either way too big for them, and we look forward to bringing that forward.
But
say
correct me if I'm wrong, but it's taken, we're still in the process of harmonizing the ordinances 6 or 7 years after consolidation, correct? So
Correct.
The kind of zoning that we're talking about is not going to be a 2019 goal or even a 2020 goal.
No, I would actually say we're actively working
but
on
the kind of change that the people who have voiced opposition to
Redrawing the zoning districts.
Redrawing the
Again,
zoning.
I don't want to get into a discussion about this, but you could do lot area FARs based on a half acre, a quarter acre, eighth of an acre. You could do that, not based on zones, but I don't want to derail this conversation into that alley, but there's a lot of things that we could do that you don't have to rewrite the whole ordinance to do it. There's some fixes that could help a lot of people out there. So,
And I expect
it's on our list. We definitely want to get it done this year.
Thank you. So I have a few comments. First of all, I think that people who spoke, I think, as I understand the ordinance, and maybe someone will correct me if I'm wrong, but I think some of the people who spoke did not realize that the ordinance would protect them. I think what Councilman Quinn said about taxes is really true, that passing this will limit the building of larger houses and property values of houses that are not allowed to be expanded will become more modest. So your sale value is going to go down, but over time your taxes should go down too. So it seemed to me that's how I understand it. But at the same time, you then lose the ability to make minor renovations without going before the zoning board. So either way, there are losses. In one case, property taxes will most likely continue to rise because the more modest houses are more desirable and people want to live in walking distance from town. That's the world of 2019 that we live in. People don't mostly want to live in larger lots out on the periphery. Those houses are declining in value. So I just wanted to get out there. So I think either way, unfortunately, there's a loss in one way or another. At the beginning, I asked Mr. Bridger how many houses he thought had been torn down and built in a way that wouldn't be allowed if this ordinance had been in place since 2015. And he said 10 to 20 houses. So I would like to...
Per year.
10 to 20 houses per year. Okay. All right. That's a little bit different, but okay. I think still that's not enough to explain the increase in taxes that Councilman Quinn was talking about. I'm not opposed to this ordinance in theory, and I know that's a squiggly statement, but I really do feel I'd like to see more details made available to homeowners. I don't want this to go away, but I'd like to take a break and hopefully reconsider it. I know that may not be.
Okay.
I see.
Okay, so
Okay, thanks.
listen, it's after 10, and I feel like there's not a whole lot of unanimity on the council. I will say I think what I'm hearing from everybody is that affordability is a real concern across the board, and that we're all concerned about what's happening in our neighborhoods. And I think the big question that we all have to figure out is what's the best way to get to where we want to go, given that our tools are maybe not perfect tools. And I think you can see us struggling with it. I think we heard you all struggling with it too. We do have more on our agenda, so my recommendation is going to be that we continue the public hearing.
Right. One option that the council has is that you can keep the public hearing open.
Okay. Can
and
we do
carry
it
it to your next the next meeting or whatever meeting you pick?
I'd like to do it to March 25th because we're going to be introducing the budget on the 11th, and we have some other.
Yeah,
I mean, you guys are all welcome to come back for that, but I don't think we can. The other thing,
I'm sorry, it's just in continuing the public hearing, as long as you just give the date certain,
okay,
it's fine. So it doesn't have to be the next meeting, but just be very specific about what meeting you're continuing it to.
Okay, so I'm recommending that we continue this public hearing to the March 25th meeting. If you spoke tonight, your comments will go on the record, and we will all be reviewing them, so you don't have to say the same exact thing on March 25th. But you're welcome to come back, and you're certainly welcome to reach out to people on council in the interim. Just so everybody knows, we have to operate by Open Public Meeting Act rules. So that means if you write an email to every single person on council on the same email, that really hampers our ability to write back to you, because we can all have conversations with you individually, but we can't have a conversation where all of us are on an email together. We have to talk here, and that's part of why this is the sausage being made, that you're seeing us struggle with it together, because this is our only venue to do that. So anyway, I'm sorry there's no real conclusion for tonight, but we will be carrying it over to March 25th. Okay, thank you, everybody. Next is Ordinance 2019-5, an ordinance by the Municipality of Princeton abolishing the Complete Streets Committee, modifying the membership of the Bicycle Advisory Committee, and amending the Code of the Borough of Princeton, New Jersey, 1974. I'd like to open up the public hearing on this ordinance. I just want to make sure that people hear that I opened up the public hearing for Ordinance 2019-5. All right, seeing no one, I'll close the public hearing and bring it back to council. Ms. Kremler, did you have?
Second.
So it's been moved by Ms. Kremler and seconded by Mr. Quinn. Any further discussion? Madam Clerk, please. Oh, sorry, Mr. Cohen?
Yes. I do support the ordinance, but I want to report to the other members of council that at the Bike Walk Summit this weekend, I learned that Princeton was actually turned down by Sustainable Princeton. Our complete streets policy is not adequate. And so I'm a little concerned that we have a lot of work to do on complete streets. And while I understand that the committee was not serving the purpose that it needs to serve, that we really need to make sure that we address the Sustainable Princeton's concerns so that we really have an effective complete streets policy in town going forward.
Yeah, and I would also, if you can communicate what you know about that, David, to Deanna Stockton, I think that she'd be interested in knowing that. And part of what this ordinance calls for is that council essentially act as that umbrella group, and so we'll be having a meeting. Not everybody needs to attend, but everybody is welcome to attend, and it'll be with the chairs of the transportation-related committee and ad hoc groups. So that should be an interesting meeting for everybody interested in transportation.
Well, right. I mean, because I'm hoping what we're going to be doing is forming, instead of a large standing committee, project-based committees, so project-based task forces that will really work and address certain issues. So I think it's great.
That could be one of them.
Right, we can address those issues more head-on.
Madam Clerk, please call the roll. We'll vote down the line. Just state your name and your vote.
Eve Niedergang, yes.
David Cohen, yes.
Jenny Kremiller, yes.
Oh, Tim Quinn, yes.
Leticia Fraga, yes.
Dwayne Williamson, yes.
Okay, the ordinance passes unanimously. Wow.
Thanks for trying to listen.
Okay, next is ordinance 2019-6, an ordinance by the municipality of Princeton increasing permitted floor area ratio for laboratory research uses in the OR2 zoning district and amending sections 10B-241, 10B-246N, and 10B-268 of the Code of the Township of Princeton, New Jersey, 1968. And before we open up the public hearing, Mr. LaPlace, do you have any comments on this, or are you just here to answer questions if they arise?
I'm here to answer questions, but I would like to just reiterate that this is a very much a smart growth initiative on the part of the municipality. It's in keeping with some of the goals set forth as recently as 2017 in the master plan re-examination report, where we want to give incentives for more investment in our commercial areas, in particular the OR2 zone in the area of Bun Drive and the Princeton Shopping Center. So this is kind of an exciting way to take what we have in terms of existing facilities in commercial areas and make them more viable.
Great, thank you.
I'll
Are
move
there any
to
questions from
approve-
councilors? Can we open up the public hearing?
Public hearing first.
Okay, I'd like to open up the public hearing on this ordinance. Do you have your hand up, or are you just scratching your head?
Or are you
No?
bidding on the
Okay.
lot?
No, I'm not calling you. I didn't know if you wanted, I didn't know if you would raise your hand.
This is about the laboratory. Yeah, that's right, yes. Mia Sachs, Sturgeon Road. I just wanted to know if there are any restrictions on animal research and if, yeah.
I don't know if that would be covered in other parts of the zoning, or, I don't know.
I'm sorry, I think that would actually be covered under the health code. But I know that this is very descriptive, and this talks specifically about household products and that sort of thing that, for instance.
But yeah, so it did come before the planning board, and I think it wasn't clear to us whether.
Yeah, and I will say animal testing with household products is actually quite common. You know, they put the shampoo in the bunny's eyes until they.
We do have representatives from the company that's interested in where we're doing this proposed ordinance, and I don't know if you want to ask that question directly.
More about in general. I mean, it's probably a question about any future.
It would just be good to know one way or the other.
Thank you for your question. Derek, is there anywhere in zoning that doesn't allow for, that prohibits animal testing?
Not to my knowledge, no.
Okay.
I mean, that's something we can possibly do through a separate ordinance, possibly?
Yeah, I think I think we can look into it. I'm not sure what.
Yeah, I mean, it's probably,
Yeah.
as much as I respect Mia's question, what I'm saying is that wouldn't necessarily factor in FAR for the OR2 zone, is what I'm saying. That's like maybe a separate issue.
It could
but
be
a very legitimate issue.
Yeah, I think the reason it came up is that there's a detailed description of the research activities that fall under the description of what is allowed in this ordinance, and so that's why it came up or failed to come up at the planning board. But I do think that it's a significant policy decision that doesn't make sense to address in this ordinance. You know, it's a question that many people may have opinions about. Some people may feel that animal testing is great and it furthers the cause of science, and others may disagree, and it would be a significant discussion decide to ban that. So I think that I feel it's better to pass this the way it is, even though it doesn't ban it. And then if Mia has the energy to mobilize all of Princeton, which we know she does,
Yeah,
then
it would
maybe
be
we-
strange. It would be strange to do this within
agree
the
with that.
OR2. Yeah.
I also have to say that it would be strange to ban it when the town is full of meat eaters, when since factory farming is so cruel to animals. So
She doesn't eat meat. Yeah, and
Understood.
The reason for the detailed description is that we do want to encourage the use of this zone for research and development, and that's why we went into some of the detail. And we're really excited to have, I think Church and Dwight is a great anchor to this zone too, and I think it's important for the town that they're successful and happy there, and hopefully bring in other synergistic companies. So, is there anybody else who'd like to speak as part of the public comment for this? All right, seeing no one, we'll close the public comment. And are there any further questions or comments from council? All right, we'll do with respect to the clerk, we'll do the voting as before, so state your name and your vote.
Doesn't somebody have to move the?
Oh, yes, sorry,
I'll
yes,
move it.
moved by Ms.
I was gonna
Krummeller.
move it. I'll second.
And seconded by Ms. Niedergang, thank you.
Eve Niedergang, yes.
David Cohen, yes.
Jenny Krummeller, yes.
Tim Quinn, yes.
Leticia Fraga, yes.
Dwayne Williamson, yes.
Okay, so the ordinance passes unanimously, and next we come to ordinance 2019-7, an ordinance of the municipality of Princeton concerning metered parking and parking rates, and amending the code of the Borough of Princeton, New Jersey, 1974, to correct the table formats of the Spring Street Garage parking rates, and to add President's Day as a metered holiday. And just wanted to draw everybody's attention to, we're looking at an amended version of this, and it has a slight change in section 1932B4. Is there a motion to approve? Oh, yeah,
Public
sorry, I'm
comment.
going to open up the public hearing on this ordinance.
Could you repeat the question?
I was just opening up the public hearing on this.
Oh, okay. You were looking right at me. I
Oh,
thought,
no.
I thought while Mark was talking
You
to
gave me a
that-
look. All right.
No.
All right, then, anybody like to speak to this? Seeing no one, I'll close the public hearing.
I'll move it.
And moved by Mr.
Second.
Cohen, and seconded by Mr. Quinn.
Before you vote, just to be clear that the motion is to adopt it with the amendment to the
Yes,
section that
right.
you referenced.
Yep. And Ms. Niedergang, if you could start.
Eve Niedergang, yes.
David Cohen, yes.
Krummeller, yes.
Tim Quinn, yes.
Leticia Fraga, yes.
Dwayne Williamson, yes.
Okay, this ordinance also passes unanimously, and now we come to an ordinance introduction, 2019-8, an ordinance by the municipality of Princeton concerning right-of-way permits and amending Chapter 19 entitled Streets, Sidewalks, Bike Lanes, and Shared Use Paths of the Code of the Township of Princeton, New Jersey, 1968. And Trishka, can you talk to us about this ordinance? This is for the utility structures.
Yeah, basically what's happened is that the FCC, the Federal Communications Commission, has passed new regulations dealing with these small wireless facilities or small node installations that go on utility poles and public rights of way. And with these new regulations out of the FCC, the municipality's ability to control these installations in the rights of way has been really circumscribed. But you have sort of very limited things that you can do if you have an ordinance in place. So the purpose of this ordinance is to set up a review process and to establish some standards. It's very similar to the agreement that you approved with Crown Castle. If you'll recall doing that, I think it was towards the end of last year or sometime last year. And the ordinance incorporates a lot of the provisions that were in that Crown Castle agreement. It's also based on some model ordinances that a lot of municipalities have been developing in response to the FCC's 2018 rulemaking. So I guess the biggest takeaway for you guys is there's not a whole lot you can do in this area. What you can do, we've tried to put into this ordinance, and we're confident that everything that's in here complies with the regulations.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Produce it or.
Well, go ahead.
I did, but I think you jumped in first. Did you have some
I
comments?
just
or
had a
questions?
question. I can't believe I read this carefully enough to catch this, but, and maybe it's the way it's supposed to be, but.
It is.
Okay.
So
I'm
your
gonna
email,
read
but
it
ask
out.
your question on the record. I don't want to steal your thunder.
So section 619-10.4B1 governs heights of poles and states height. No pole shall be taller than 35 feet or 110% of the height of poles in the surrounding streetscape, whichever is taller. And I asked whether it should be whichever is smaller.
No, the way I checked with Lucille Davey, who worked on this very closely with Deanna and Jack, and she confirmed what I thought, which is that's actually correct the way it's written. First off, most poles are well over 35 feet. They range in height, and the reason for the 110% is to, sometimes these things do stick up a little bit above the existing pole height, but you're looking at the poles within a defined area. I think it's 500 linear feet, if I'm remembering correctly from the ordinance. But yep, the way that's written, that is how it's intended to be drafted.
I just was trying to, and I realized after I wrote the email that it wasn't a simple question. I was trying to do these thought experiments about when the 35-foot pole would kick in, right? Because if you have a street with 20-foot utility poles, which probably doesn't exist.
Yeah, or you might have a street with no utility poles and they're putting in new ones. And because that can happen, which as someone who lives in a neighborhood with no poles whatsoever, no light poles, no utility poles, I would not welcome that on my street. But I think in the case you could have a potential situation where they're putting in brand new poles, so they would be capped at 35 feet. But in areas where you already have established poles, they can go higher than that.
Okay. Thank you.
I did have a few questions. The application process is the same if you're adding a single pole as if you're adding a whole slew of them? I mean, there is a reference to an open public meeting. I assume that there's discretion and that, adding one or two poles in a neighborhood would not generate a public meeting the way.
And the decision on whether to have that neighborhood meeting is discretionary with the staff. And so I think that's because it is an administrative review process. And I think for the most part, you can envision any number of places in town where this is not going to generate any kind of excitement.
Right.
But then there are certain areas, and for instance, we had a big issue. I think it was with a pole that was going in outside the preserve, I believe. There are going to be places in town where there are neighborhoods that are going to be affected that might, be upset about it or at least want to have some input. And I think. So the purpose of that provision is to give staff the ability in the appropriate circumstances to tell the provider, you're going to go and have a neighborhood meeting and tell people what you're doing. But it's not mandatory, it's discretionary.
Okay, thank you. And my second question is about the fees, which seem, I'm sure you're using standard fees, but they seem ridiculously low to me. Are these $100 per pole?
What's in there is what we're allowed to do.
Okay.
And please don't make me elaborate.
Okay, all right, because I've read about, $10,000 a year for, transmission. So, okay, never mind. Thanks.
That is, yes, so that's one of the areas of the law that seems to keep changing. And when I said what municipalities can do is becoming more circumscribed, that could be an example.
Okay. Any other questions on this ordinance before we take a vote to introduce? Is there a motion to introduce?
So moved.
Second.
Moved by Mr. Quinn, seconded by Ms. Krummeller. And we'll start on my right.
Eve Niedergang, yes.
David Cohen, yes.
Jenny Krummeller, yes.
Tim Quinn, yes.
Leticia Fraga, yes.
Dwayne Williamson, yes.
So the ordinance has been introduced, and the public hearing will be on March 25th, 2019. Next, we come to our resolutions. The first is 1973, resolution awarding a portion of the contract known as road materials to American Asphalt Company Incorporated in the amount of $223,200, and also 19-74, resolution awarding a portion of the contract known as road materials to Trap Rock Industries LLC in the amount of $39,525. Is there a motion to approve both?
So moved.
Second.
Moved by Ms. Krummeller, seconded by Mr. Quinn. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, resolution's passed unanimously. Next is 1975, resolution authorizing the award of a contract to Sustainable Princeton for 2019 to provide various services and programs to assist the municipality to achieve its sustainability goals in an amount not to exceed $31,000. Is there a motion to approve?
I'll move.
Moved by
Second.
Ms. Fraga, seconded by Ms. Niedergang. Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Resolution passes unanimously. Next is 1976, resolution authorizing professional services agreement with French and Perello Associates, PA, in the not-to-exceed amount of $20,000 for the purpose of on-call general engineering services for 2019. Is there a motion to approve?
So moved.
Moved
Second.
by Mr. Quinn, seconded by Ms. Krummeller. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Resolution passes unanimously. Next is 1977, resolution amending the paving design and materials in the adopted Nassau Streetscape Design Standards dated fall 2016 to specify bluestone colored tinted concrete in a rectangular perpendicular design. Is
So
there a
moved.
motion to approve?
Second.
Great job, Mayor.
Moved by Mr. Cohen and seconded by Ms. Krummeller. And I just want to make sure that this receives the aesthetic approval of Mr. Cohen, who we were talking about in his absence at the last meeting, but it accurately, apparently.
Yeah, I thought I had missed my chance by missing the last meeting, but Deanna was kind enough to say she could correct it for me. So yes, this is the one that I wanted.
Okay, excellent. All
And
right.
I
All
want
in-
to say I really appreciate the aesthetic element being done and over with, and I hope I never have to weigh in on that.
Okay. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Resolution passes unanimously. Next is 1978, resolution authorizing the memorandum of understanding between the municipality of Princeton, Princeton First Aid and Rescue Squad, and the Princeton Fire Department concerning rescue response protocol policy. And I do want to thank Mr. DeShield for helping to work through this and bringing it to us. It's obviously a really important policy. Is there a motion to approve?
I'll move.
Second.
Ms. Fraga, seconded by Mr. Quinn. Any discussion or questions? All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Resolution passes unanimously. Next, we come to the consent agenda, which contains items of a routine nature passed by single vote. Are there any items anybody would like removed from the consent agenda?
Mayor, I'd like 1984 removed for discussion.
Okay. Is there a motion to approve the consent agenda minus 1984?
So moved.
Second.
Okay, so moved by Ms. Niedergang, seconded by Mr. Cohen. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, the consent agenda passes, and now we'll take up 1984.
So moved. My question, I'll move it and someone will second so that we can discuss, I guess.
Okay.
My friend, Mr. Parker, who's still here, spent a lot of time at our meeting over in Monument Hall talking about, I think that the wording here for non-binding voluntary dispute, and then it just ends, I don't think that's the correct nomenclature from the ordinance. So I think it's called
On here?
on
There's a resolution.
The resolution should be
on the
added there?
resolution.
Yeah.
There's a, because maybe there's a resolution, maybe it got confused because it's resolution that's
Oh.
missing, right? So it's the,
Yeah,
it's the
dispute.
resolution for resolution.
But I thought it's called conflict resolution.
Oh, not dispute resolution.
It's called voluntary
Voluntary
non-binding
non-binding conflict resolution. So
Okay.
I move that we amend that to say, what she said.
Conflict resolution is
Which I
as
will say
opposed to
one more
dispute
time.
resolution.
So 1984 is the resolution adopting revised guidelines for the Civil Rights Commission, Commission regarding non-binding voluntary conflict resolution.
Non-binding conflict resolution.
No.
No, voluntary
Voluntary,
non-binding conflict
conflict
resolution.
Oh,
So it's
the voluntary comes first.
VNCR.
Voluntary.
Yes.
Okay,
VNCR.
I'm going to do it one more time. Resolution
Conflict
adopting
resolution.
revised guidelines for the Civil Rights Commission regarding voluntary non-binding conflict resolution.
Yes.
All right.
Yes.
Somebody want to do it one more time?
I move.
It's already
as
been moved.
I move as amended.
Okay, it's been moved by Mr. Quinn.
Second.
All right, and
Seconded.
seconded by Mr. Williamson. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, resolution passes unanimously.
Yes. Yay.
Congratulations and thank you. And now, is there a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All right, meeting is adjourned. Thank you.
I think